A desperate plea pulls Hercule Poirot to the sun-drenched coast of France, where a wealthy Englishman lies dead, stabbed in a shallow grave on a golf course. A cryptic love letter, a mysterious woman called Cinderella, and a rival detective challenge. Poirot's genius. As secrets unravel and a second body surfaces, Poirot uncovers a web of betrayal, greed, and a dark past that threatens to bury the truth. Can his little grey cells solve the deadly puzzle before the killer strikes again? Dive into murder on the Link's golfing grave. Chapter 1. A cry for help. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Hercule Poirot's London flat, casting a soft golden glow across the room. The air was thick with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, a ritual Poirot cherished as much for its precision as for its flavour. He sat at his polished mahogany desk, his small, neat hands arranging the morning's correspondence, with the meticulous care of a jeweller sorting gems. Each letter was opened with a silver letter opener, its blade glinting in the sunlight, and placed in a precise pile according to urgency. Captain Arthur Hastings, his loyal friend and occasional confidant, lounged in an armchair by the fireplace, flipping through the Times with a distracted air. Poirot. Old chap, Hastings said, glancing up from the newspaper, you've been fussing over those letters for nearly an hour. Anything interesting? Or is it all bills and invitations to tedious dinners? Poirot's moustache twitched, a sure sign of amusement or irritation. Hastings could never quite tell which. Mon ami, he replied, his voice smooth as velvet. You underestimate the importance of the written word. A letter, Hastings, is a window into the soul of its writer. One does not merely read a letter, one deciphers it. Hastings chuckled, folding the newspaper and tossing it onto the side table. Decipher away, then. But I'd wager it's nothing more exciting than a request to find a lost cat. Poirot's green eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief. You lack imagination, Hastings. A cat. Perhaps, but a cat with secrets, none. He picked up the next envelope, its cream-coloured paper slightly crumpled, as if it had been handled in haste. The postmark read Merlinville-sur-Mer, France. Poirot's brow furrowed slightly as he slit the envelope open and unfolded the single sheet within. His eyes scanned the page, and the room seemed to grow quieter, as if the very air held its breath. What is it? Hastings asked, leaning forward, his curiosity piqued by the sudden stillness in Poirot's demeanour. Poirot did not answer. Immediately, he read the letter again, his lips moving slightly as he absorbed each word. Then, with a deliberate motion, he placed the letter on the desk and steepled his fingers. It is a cry for help, he said at last, his voice low and measured. From a man who believes his life is in danger. Hastings sat up straight, his casual air replaced by alertness. Danger. Who's it from? Monsieur Paul Renaud, Poirot replied, tapping the letter with a manicured finger. A gentleman of considerable wealth, residing in Merlinville-sur-Mer, a charming seaside town on the northern coast of France. He writes with urgency, imploring me to come at once. He claims to have enemies who mean to do him harm. Hastings frowned. Enemies? What sort of enemies? Business rivals? Spurned lovers? Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. He does not say. The letter is brief, yet it speaks volumes. Listen. He picked up the letter and read aloud, his accent lending a dramatic weight to the words. My dear Monsieur Poirot, I am in dire need of your services. I have reason to believe my life is in grave danger. I cannot say more in a letter, for I fear it may be intercepted. Please, I beg of you, come to Merlinville-sur-Mer at once. I reside at the Villa Genevieve. Time is of the essence. I will compensate you generously for your trouble. Yours in desperation. Paul Renaud. Hastings let out a low whistle. Sounds serious. Do you know this Renaud fellow? Poirot shook his head. None, I have not had the pleasure. But his name is not unknown to me. He is an Englishman, though he has made his fortune abroad. I believe in South America. A man of means, Hastings, and a man of means often attracts trouble as a flame attracts moths. Well, what are we waiting for? Hastings said, already halfway out of his chair. If the man's in danger, we should catch the next train to France. Poirot raised a hand, his expression calm but firm. Patience, mon ami. Haste is the enemy of clarity. We must prepare. I will send a telegram to confirm our arrival, and we shall take the afternoon train to Dover, then the ferry to Calais. From there, Merlinville is but a short journey. Hastings grinned, his enthusiasm undimmed. A case, Poirot. A proper case. It's been too long since we had a real mystery to sink our teeth into. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Indeed, Hastings. And something tells me this mystery will require all of my little grey cells. The journey to Merlinville-sur-Mer was a study in contrasts. Hastings, ever the eager adventurer, spent the train ride to Dover speculating wildly about Paul Renaud's predicament. Perhaps he's crossed paths with a smuggling ring, he suggested, his eyes bright with excitement. Or maybe it's blackmail, some dark secret from his South American days coming back to haunt him. Poirot, seated opposite in the first-class compartment, listened with a polite but distant air, his attention fixed on the passing countryside. The rolling hills of Kent, bathed in the soft light of early summer, seemed to hold more interest for him than Hastings' theories. You spin tales like a novelist, Hastings, he said at last, but the truth, it is often simpler and yet more complex than the imagination allows. The ferry crossing was smooth, the sea a glittering expanse of blue under a cloudless sky. Poirot, dressed impeccably in a light grey suit and a straw hat, stood at the rail, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon where France awaited. Hastings, less enamoured of the sea, contented himself with a cup of tea in the saloon. Wondering what awaited them in Merlinville dock by evening, they arrived at the small, picturesque station of Merlinville-sur-Mer. The air was warm, carrying the salty tang of the sea and the faint perfume of blooming roses. The town itself was charming, with whitewashed villas nestled among lush gardens and a golf course that stretched along the cliffs, its fairways of vivid green against the blue of the Channel. The Villa Genevieve, Renaud's residence, was a grand affair, its stone façade glowing in the fading light. But as Poirot and Hastings approached, a sense of unease settled over them. A maid, her face pale and her apron slightly askew, answered the door. "Monsieur Poirot," she asked, her voice trembling. "You are too late." "Too late?" Poirot's tone was sharp, his eyes narrowing. "Explain, mademoiselle." The maid's hands twisted in her apron. "Monsieur Renaud. He is dead. Murdered, they say. They found him this morning on the golf course." Hastings gasped, but Poirot's expression remained inscrutable. "Take us to Madame Renaud," he said calmly, "and tell us everything you know." The drawing-room of the Villa Genevieve was a study in elegance, with high ceilings, ornate furniture, and all windows overlooking the garden. Eloise Renaud, a strikingly beautiful woman in her late 40s, sat on a velvet sofa, her face pale but composed. Her dark hair was swept up in a chignon, and her eyes, though red-rimmed, held a quiet strength. Beside her stood a police officer, his uniform crisp but his demeanour harried. "Monsieur Poirot," Eloise said, rising to greet him. Her voice was low, with a faint tremor. "I had hoped you would arrive in time. My husband, he was so afraid." Poirot bowed slightly, his gaze never leaving her face. "Madam, my deepest condolences. Please, tell me what has happened. Every detail, if you please." Eloise took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Last night, Paul was restless. He said he had received threats, though he would not tell me from whom. Around midnight, I awoke to a noise, a crash, like glass breaking. Before I could react, two men burst into our bedroom. They were masked, their voices rough. They tied me to a chair and took Paul. I heard him cry out, begging them not to hurt him. Then, silence." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "This morning the groundskeeper found him on the golf course near the 7th fairway. He had been stabbed in a shallow grave, as if they meant to hide him, but ran out of time." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "A shallow grave, you say? Most curious. And these masked men, did you see anything that might identify them? A mark? A mannerism?" Eloise shook her head. It was dark, and they wore scarves over their faces, but one of them, his hands were rough, calloused. A working man, perhaps. The police officer, a stout man named Commissaire Bix, cleared his throat. "We are investigating. Monsieur Poirot, the local force is competent, but I understand Monsieur Renaud requested your assistance. You are welcome to observe, but I must insist you do not interfere." Poirot's smile was polite but cool. "Interfere? Non, commissaire. I merely seek to understand. May I see the body?" Bix hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. It has not been moved. Follow me." The golf course was eerily silent as they approached the 7th fairway. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and a cool breeze rustled the grass. Paul Renaud's body lay in a shallow trench, partially covered with earth. He was a man of middle age, his face handsome, but now frozen in a grimace of pain. A single stab wound marred his chest, the blood dark and congealed. Most striking, however, was his attire. An oversized overcoat, far too large for his frame, draped over his shoulders like a cloak. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, kneeling beside the body. His gloved hands moved with precision, examining the coat, the wound, the surrounding earth. "This coat, it is not his, I think." Bix frowned. "What makes you say that?" "The fit," Poirot replied simply. "It is too large, too clumsy. A man like Paul Renaud, wealthy, particular he, would not wear such a garment. And this wound, clean, precise, a dagger, perhaps, wielded with intent." Hastings, standing a few paces back, shivered. "Gruesome business, Poirot! Who would do such a thing?" Poirot rose, dusting off his gloves. "That, Hastings, is what we must discover. But already the little grey cells, they are at work. There is something here, something not quite right." As they returned to the villa, Poirot's mind was already racing, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. A letter, a murder, an oversized coat, a shallow grave on a golf course. What did it all mean? And why had Paul Renaud been so afraid? The rest of the chapter unfolds with Poirot and Hastings settling into a local inn. As the Villa Genevieve is now a crime scene, Poirot begins questioning the household staff, learning that Renaud had been secretive in recent weeks, often meeting with a mysterious visitor at odd hours. The maid, Francoise, mentions seeing a woman in a dark cloak near the villa the day before the murder, though she could not identify her. Hastings, ever the romantic, speculates about a scorned lover, but Poirot dismisses this as too obvious. Instead, he focuses on the details, the oversized coat, the shallow grave, and the fact that Renaud sent his son Jack and a chauffeur away, leaving only female servants in the house. Poirot's methodical approach contrasts with Bex's blunter tactics, setting up a rivalry that will play out in later chapters. The chapter ends with Poirot standing at the window of their inn, staring out at the moonlit golf course, his mind churning. "There is a pattern here, Hastings," he says, softly, "a pattern that hides a truth, and I, Hercule Poirot, will find it." Chapter 2, the scene of the Crimith morning sun cast long, golden rays over the rolling greens of the Merlinville-sur-Mer golf course, its manicured fairways stretching toward the horizon, like a pristine canvas. But the beauty of the landscape was marred by the grim discovery at its heart, a shallow grave, hastily dug, where Paul Renaud's lifeless body lay. Hercule Poirot, his small frame impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, despite the early hour, stood at the edge of the crime scene, his sharp eyes scanning every detail with the precision of a watchmaker. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion, shifted uncomfortably, his face pale as he took in the sight. The air carried a faint salty tang from the nearby sea, mingling with the earthy scent of freshly turned soil. A small crowd of local police and curious onlookers had gathered, kept at a distance by a stern-faced officer who barked orders in rapid French. Poirot, however, paid them no mind. His attention was fixed on the body which lay face up in the shallow trench, its arms splayed awkwardly as though caught in a moment of surprise. The oversized overcoat draped over Paul Renaud's frame was the first anomaly to catch Poirot's eye. It was far too large, its sleeves hanging past the hands, the hem brushing the dirt. A curious choice, Poirot thought, for a man of Renaud's wealth and taste. Mon ami, Poirot said, turning to Hastings. His voice calm but tinged with curiosity. Observe the coat. It is not tailored to the body of Monsieur Renaud. Why, do you suppose? Would a man of such means wear a garment so ill-fitting? Hastings frowned, his brow creasing as he studied the scene. Perhaps he was in a hurry, or it was a disguise? His tone was uncertain, as it often was when faced with Poirot's probing questions. Poirot's moustache twitched slightly, a sign of amusement or perhaps mild exasperation. A disguise, you say? Perhaps. But a disguise for what purpose, and why here, on this golf course? So close to his own home, Hastings, we must look deeper. The little grey cells. They must work. He knelt beside the grave, his gloved hands hovering over the body without touching it. The local police had already trampled much of the surrounding area, much to Poirot's dismay. But he was not one to let such carelessness deter him. His eyes darted to the ground, noting the uneven edges of the grave, the clumps of earth scattered haphazardly. The grave was shallow, barely deep enough to cover the body, suggesting haste or interruption. Poirot's gaze lingered on a small patch of grass nearby where the blades were bent, as though something heavy had been dragged across them. Regardez, Poirot murmured, pointing to the grass, "This mark, it is fresh. Something or someone was moved here recently. Perhaps our victim, or perhaps something else entirely." Hastings squinted at the grass, trying to see what Poirot saw, but his expression remained puzzled. Could it be from the body being dragged into the grave? Possible, mon ami, but unlikely. The marks are too narrow, too precise. A body would leave a broader trail. This is something else. We should keep it in mind. Poirot rose, brushing a speck of dirt from his sleeve, and turned his attention to the body itself. Paul Renaud's face was pale, almost serene, despite the violent end he had met. A single stab wound pierced his chest. The blood now dried and crusted around the tear in his shirt. The oversized overcoat, however, showed no corresponding tear, which struck Poirot as odd. He leaned closer, inspecting the fabric, and noticed a faint bulge in one of the pockets. With a nod to the officer standing nearby, who reluctantly gave permission, Poirot carefully extracted a folded piece of paper. It was a letter, written in a delicate, feminine hand. The ink was slightly smudged, as though it had been handled in haste. Poirot unfolded it with care, his eyes scanning the contents. The words were cryptic, filled with references to love and betrayal, but no names were mentioned. The signature at the bottom was a simple initial, M. Poirot's lips pursed as he read, his mind already turning over possibilities. A love letter, Hastings remarked, peering over Poirot's shoulder. Rather romantic for a man like Renaud, don't you think? Romantic, perhaps. Poirot replied, folding the letter and slipping it into his pocket for safekeeping. But romance, it can be a motive for many things, including murder. We must learn who this M is, and what hold they had over our victim. The officer in charge, a burly man with a thick moustache and a demeanour that suggested he resented Poirot's presence, approached them. "Monsieur Poirot," he said gruffly, "Madame Renaud is waiting at the villa. She insists on speaking with you. She says she has information about the night her husband was taken." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Very well. We should go to her at once. But first, let us examine the surroundings a little more. The scene. It speaks to those who listen." He began to circle the grave, his steps deliberate, his eyes never leaving the ground. Hastings followed, trying to mimic Poirot's methodical approach, but feeling increasingly out of his depth. The golf course was quiet now, the early morning. Stillness unbroken except for the occasional cry of a gull overhead. Poirot paused near a cluster of bushes, his gaze fixed on something small and metallic glinting in the grass. He bent down and retrieved it with a handkerchief, a fragment of lead piping. No longer than a finger, its surface scratched and slightly bent. "Curio," Poirot muttered, holding the fragment up to the light. "This is not a tool one expects." To find on a golf course, and yet, here it is, so close to our crime scene." Hastings leaned in, his curiosity piqued. Could it be the murder weapon? Poirot shook his head. None. The wound was made by a blade, not a blunt object. But this pipe, it is significant. Perhaps it was dropped by the killer, or perhaps it was left deliberately to mislead us. We shall see. He tucked the fragment into his pocket alongside the letter and continued his inspection. The golf course was bordered by a low stone wall, beyond which lay the road leading to the Renault villa. Poirot noted the tire tracks in the dirt, faint but visible, suggesting a vehicle had passed through recently. He filed this away in his mind, along with the other clues: the oversized overcoat, the love letter, the drag grass, the lead piping. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and Poirot was determined to fit them together as they made their way toward the villa. Hastings broke the silence. "What do you make of it all, Poirot? It's a devil of a mess, if you ask me. Masked intruders, a shallow grave, a love letter. It's like something out of a novel." Poirot smiled faintly. "A novel, perhaps, but one with a very real ending. The facts, Hastings, they are our guide. The overcoat, it is too large. The letter, it is too vague. Pipe, it is too out of place. These are not accidents. They are the threads of a tapestry, and we must weave them together to see the picture they form." The Renault villa loomed ahead, a grand structure of white stone and tall windows, its elegance at odds with the tragedy that had unfolded nearby. As they approached, the front door opened and a woman stepped out. She was tall and elegant, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face pale but composed. This, Poirot knew, was Eloise Renault, the widow of the murdered man. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady but laced with grief. "Thank you for coming. I don't know where to begin. My husband—" She faltered, her hand rising to her mouth as though to stifle a sob. Poirot inclined his head, his expression softening. "Madam, my deepest sympathies. We will find the truth, I assure you. But first, you must tell me everything. Every detail, no matter how small, may be of importance." Eloise nodded, gesturing for them to enter the villa. The interior was as grand as the exterior, with polished marble floors and ornate furnishings. They settled in a sitting room, where a maid brought tea that went untouched. Eloise sat across from Poirot, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and began her story. "It was late last night," she said, her voice low. "Paul and I were in our bedroom when we heard a noise downstairs. He went to investigate, but before he could return, two men burst into the room. They were masked, their faces hidden, and they spoke with foreign accents, Spanish, I think. They tied me to a chair and demanded to know where Paul kept his valuables. I told them I didn't know, but they didn't believe me. They took him. They dragged him out of the house, and that was the last I saw of him." Her voice broke and she looked away, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Hastings, ever the gentleman, leaned forward, his expression full of sympathy. "That must have been terrifying, Madame Renault. Did you see anything else, anything that might help us identify these men?" Eloise shook her head. "It happened so quickly. They wore dark clothing, and their masks covered everything but their eyes. One of them had a scar, I think, above his left eyebrow, but I can't be certain. It was so dark, and I was so frightened." Poirot listened in silence, his fingers steepled before him. When Eloise finished, he leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on her. "Madam, your story is most compelling. But tell me, why did your husband write to me? His letter spoke of danger, yet he gave no specifics. Did he mention anything to you? Anything that might explain why he feared for his life?" Eloise hesitated, her fingers tightening in her lap. He was worried, yes, for weeks. He had been distracted, secretive. He said it was business troubles, but I sensed there was more. He wouldn't tell me what. Paul was a private man, Monsieur Poirot. He kept his fears to himself." Poirot nodded, though his expression suggested he was not entirely satisfied. "And your son, Jack, where is he now?" I understand he was not at home last night." Eloise's face tightened at the mention of her son. "Jack left for Paris 2 days ago. He and Paul had a disagreement. It was nothing serious, just a young man's rebellion. Jack is impulsive, but he would never—" Her voice trailed off and she looked away, as though unwilling to finish the thought. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. Instead, he rose from his chair, his movements precise and deliberate. "Thank you, Madame Renaud. Your account is most helpful. We will return to the golf course now, but I may need to speak with you again. In the meantime, rest and try to recall any detail, however small, that might shed light on this tragedy." Eloise nodded, her composure faltering for a moment before she regained it. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. Anything you need." As they left the villa, Hastings glanced at Poirot, his expression troubled. "Do you believe her, Poirot? Her story? About the masked men it sounds plausible, but there's something off about it." Poirot's mustache twitched again, this time with a hint of approval. "Very good, Hastings. You begin to see the shadows behind the words. Madame Renaud's story. It is too neat to complete. The masked men, the foreign accents. The scar, it is like a scene from a play, rehearsed and performed. But why? That is the question we must answer." They returned to the golf course, where the police were wrapping up their initial investigation. The body had been removed, but the shallow grave remained, a stark reminder of the violence that had occurred. Poirot stood at its edge, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind clearly at work. "Hastings," he said after a moment, "consider the facts. A man is stabbed and left in a grave he himself may have dug. An overcoat too large for him is draped over his body. A love letter, signed only with an initial, is found in his pocket. A piece of lead piping lies nearby, yet it is not the murder weapon. And Madame Renaud speaks of masked intruders who vanish into the night. What do these things tell us?" Hastings shook his head at a loss. "I haven't the faintest idea. Poirot, it's all so muddled." Poirot smiled, a glint of determination in his eyes. "Muddled, perhaps, but not without order. The little grey cells. They will find the pattern. For now, we must learn more about Monsieur Renaud, his life, his enemies, his secrets. And we must find this M, the writer of the letter. They hold the key to this mystery, I am certain." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting harsh light over the golf course, Poirot turned away from the grave, his mind already racing. Ahead to the next piece of the puzzle. The scene of the crime had spoken, and Hercule Poirot was listening. The investigation had only just begun, but already the threads of deceit were unraveling. Poirot knew that somewhere, hidden among the clues, lay the truth he would uncover, no matter how deeply it was buried. Chapter 3. The rival detective. Its morning sun cast a golden glow over Merlinville-sur-Mer, its rays filtering through the lace curtains of the Villa Genevieve's drawing-room. Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed chair, his small, precise hands folded neatly over his lap, his mustache impeccably trimmed as always. His sharp grey eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail. The ornate chandelier, the polished mahogany table, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. Captain Arthur Hastings, his loyal companion, stood by the window, gazing out at the manicured gardens and the distant glimmer of the golf course, where Paul Renaud's body had been discovered just hours before. The weight of the tragedy hung over them, but Poirot's mind was already racing, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle that was Paul Renaud's murder. The shallow grave, the oversized overcoat, the cryptic love letter found in the victim's pocket, all of it swirled in his thoughts, like leaves caught in an autumn breeze. Yet, before he could delve deeper into his musings, the door swung open with a flourish, and a young man strode in with an air of self-assured arrogance. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume," the man said, his voice clipped and his French accent tinged with a hint of Parisian superiority. He was tall, lean, with slick-back hair and a thin mustache that seemed to mop Poirot's own. His suit was impeccably tailored, though Poirot noted the slight fraying at the cuffs as sign of ambition outpacing means. "I am indeed Hercule Poirot, the detective replied, rising with a slight bow. "And you, monsieur, must be Monsieur Giraud of the Surete." The man's lips curled into a smirk. "You've heard of me, then? Good. That will make this easier." He extended a hand, which Poirot shook with a measured grip. "I've been assigned to this case, and I intend to wrap it up swiftly. The Surete does not dawdle." Hastings, turning from the window, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Poirot, however, tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. "A most commendable goal, Monsieur Giraud. But tell me, what brings you to Merlinville so promptly? The body was discovered only this morning." Giraud's smirk widened. "News of a wealthy Englishman stabbed on a golf course travels fast, Monsieur Poirot, especially when the victim had the foresight to summon a detective of your reputation." His tone carried a faint edge of mockery, which did not go unnoticed. Poirot's expression remained serene, though Hastings caught the faintest twitch of his moustache, a sign of amusement or irritation. He could never quite tell. "And what are your initial thoughts, Monsieur Giraud?" Poirot asked, gesturing to a chair. "Please, do share. The little grey cells, they thrive on collaboration." Giraud declined the seat, preferring to pace the room with the energy of a caged panther. "The case is straightforward enough," he said, pulling a small notebook from his pocket and flipping it open. "Paul Renaud was murdered by someone with a clear motive, likely financial. The man was wealthy, and wealth breeds enemies. The oversized overcoat suggests an attempt to disguise the body, perhaps to delay identification. The love letter, a distraction, or perhaps a clue to a jealous rival. As for the shallow grave, it indicates haste, a killer who didn't have time to dispose of the body properly." Hastings frowned, crossing his arms. "That's a lot of assumptions for a case that's barely a day old," he said, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. Giraud shot him a glance, his eyes narrowing. "Assumptions, Captain Hastings? No, no. These are deductions based on evidence. You'll find my methods are far more modern than those of your friend here." He gestured toward Poirot, who merely smiled, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Modern methods are most fascinating," Poirot said, his voice smooth as silk. "But tell me, Monsieur Giraud, have you examined the crime scene yourself? The golf course, the grave, the lead piping found nearby?" Giraud's pacing slowed, and he turned to face Poirot, his expression one of barely concealed disdain. "I've seen the reports, and I'll be visiting the scene shortly. But I don't need to fuss over every blade of grass to know what's what. The Surete has solved cases far more complex than this with half the effort." Poirot's smile widened, though there was no warmth in it. "Effort, Monsieur Giraud, is never wasted when it comes to the truth. But perhaps we can make this investigation interesting. A wager, perhaps? The first to unmask the killer wins the day." Hastings stifled a chuckle, knowing Poirot's penchant for turning investigations into intellectual games. Giraud, however, took the bait, his eyes gleaming with competitive fervor. "A wager? Very well, Monsieur Poirot. I'll have this case solved before you've finished polishing your mustache." "Excellent." Poirot clapped his hands together. "Then let us proceed to the golf course. The scene of the crime. It always has much to say, does it not?" The trio made their way to the golf course, a sprawling expanse of green framed by the distant cliffs and the shimmering sea. The air was crisp, carrying the faint tang of salt, and the fairways were dotted with early morning golfers, oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded just beyond the seventh hole. A small crowd of local police and curious onlookers had gathered near the crime scene, cordoned off with rope and guarded by a stern-faced gendarme. The shallow grave where Paul Renaud's body had been found was still fresh, the earth disturbed and uneven. Poirot knelt beside it, his gloved hands hovering over the soil as if he could sense the secrets it held. Giraud, meanwhile, strode about with a notebook in hand, barking orders to the gendarmes and scribbling notes with a flourish. "Look here." "Poirot," Giraud called, pointing to a patch of trampled grass near the grave. "Footprints. 2 sets, one larger, one smaller. The killer and an accomplice, perhaps." Poirot glanced at the footprints, his head tilted. Perhaps Monsieur Giraud. But the ground is soft and the prints are not so clear. They could belong to anyone, golfers, groundskeepers, even the police who arrived first. Giraud scoffed. You overcomplicate things. The simplest explanation is often the correct one. And yet, Poirot countered, rising to his feet. The simplest explanation can obscure the truth if one does not consider all possibilities. He moved toward a nearby bush, where a piece of lead piping lay partially hidden among the leaves. He crouched again, examining it without touching it. This, for instance, a curious item to find on a golf course, Giraud shrugged, a weapon. Perhaps, or discarded by a worker. It's hardly significant. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Everything is significant, Monsieur Giraud, until proven otherwise. The little grey cells, they do not dismiss so easily. Hastings, standing a few paces away, watched the exchange with growing amusement. Giraud's brash confidence was a stark contrast to Poirot's meticulous deliberation, and he couldn't help but feel a pang of loyalty to his friend. What about Jack Renaud? Hastings interjected, hoping to steer the conversation to something concrete. The son. He's nowhere to be found. Doesn't that strike you as odd? Giraud snapped his notebook shut. Indeed, Captain, the absent son is a prime suspect. A falling out with his father, perhaps. Money troubles. I'll have him tracked down by noon. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, though his attention remained on the lead piping. Jack Renaud's absence is indeed curious. But let us not rush to judgment. The truth, it reveals itself in its own time. As they continued their examination of the scene, Poirot's sharp eyes caught another detail, a faint smudge on the edge of the grave, as if something had been dragged through the dirt. He made a mental note, filing it away with the other fragments of the puzzle. Giraud, meanwhile, was already moving on, issuing orders to the gendarmes to search the surrounding area for more clues. The morning wore on, and the tension between Poirot and Giraud grew palpable. Every observation, every deduction, became a subtle jab in their unspoken rivalry. Giraud pointed to a broken twig as evidence of a struggle. Poirot countered that it could have been snapped by a careless golfer. Giraud insisted the love letter was a key to the motive. Poirot suggested it might be a plant designed to mislead Dot by midday. The sun was high and the crowd of onlookers had thinned. The gendarmes had found nothing new, and Giraud's frustration was evident in the tightness of his jaw. Poirot, however, remained calm, his mind a whirl of possibilities. He had noticed something Giraud had overlooked, a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the lead piping, as if it had been struck against something hard. It was a minor detail, but to Poirot it was another thread in the tapestry of the case daughters. They prepared to leave the golf course. A young woman approached, her face pale and her eyes wide with worry. She was dressed in a simple but elegant frock, her dark hair pinned neatly beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I heard you were here. I need to speak with you." Poirot bowed slightly. "Mademoiselle, I am at your service. And you are Madame d'Aubreuil," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I live nearby, and I may know something about Monsieur Renaud's death." Giraud's eyes narrowed and he stepped forward, his notebook already open. "Anything you know, madame, you should tell me. I'm leading this investigation." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture polite but firm. "A moment, Monsieur Giraud. Let us hear what Madame d'Aubreuil has to say. The truth, it is best uncovered." With patience, the woman hesitated, glancing between the two men. It's about the night before last," she began. "I saw someone near the villa. A man, I think. But it was dark. He was moving quickly, as if he didn't want to be seen." Giraud pounced on the information. "A description, madam. What did he look like? Tall? Short? What was he wearing?" Madame d'Aubreuil shook her head. "I couldn't see clearly. It was too dark, and he was too far away. But I thought you should know. Poirot's eyes softened, though his mind was racing. "Merci, madam. Your information is most valuable. If you recall anything else, you will find me at the Villa Genevieve." As Madame d'Aubreuil hurried away, Giraud snorted. A vague sighting of a man in the dark. Hardly a breakthrough, Poirot. "Perhaps," Poirot replied, his voice thoughtful. "But sometimes, Monsieur Giraud, it is the shadows that hold the key to the light." The rest of the day passed in a blur of interviews and observations. Poirot and Hastings returned to the villa, where they spoke with the servants, each of whom confirmed Eloise Renaud's story of masked intruders. Yet Poirot's questions were probing, his tone gentle but relentless. He asked about the timing of the intruders' arrival, the exact words they used, the way they tied Eloise's hands. Each answer added to his mental map of the case, though. He shared little with Hastings or Giraud. Giraud, meanwhile, pursued his own leads, focusing on Jack Renaud's whereabouts. He dispatched telegrams to Paris and Calais, determined to track down the missing son. His energy was tireless, but Poirot noted a certain recklessness in his approach, a tendency to leap to conclusions without fully considering the evidence dotters. Evening fell. Poirot and Hastings sat in the villa's drawing-room, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Hastings, ever the loyal friend, couldn't resist voicing his thoughts. "I say, Poirot, this Giraud fellow is a bit of a bounder, isn't he? All bluster and no substance." Poirot chuckled, a rare sound that warmed the room. "He's young. Mon ami, and youth often mistake speed for wisdom. But he is not without talent. His methods, they are different, but they may yet yield results." Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Do you really think he'll solve the case before you?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "The little grey cells, Hastings, they do not compete for glory. They seek only the truth, and the truth, it is like a golf ball, it may roll far, but it always comes to rest in the right hole." Hastings laughed, shaking his head. "You and your metaphors, Poirot. But what about this Madame d'Aubreuil? Do you think she's telling the truth?" Poirot's expression grew serious. "Madame d'Aubreuil, she is a piece of the puzzle that does not yet fit. Her story, it is vague, yes, but there is something in her manner, something in her eyes, that tells me she knows more than she says. We must keep watch on her, Hastings, and on this mysterious Cinderella you mentioned earlier." Hastings flushed, recalling the charming young woman he'd met on the golf course. "She's just a passerby, Poirot. Probably nothing to do with the case, perhaps," Poirot said, his tone enigmatic. "But in a case such as this, mon ami, no one is just anything. Everyone is a suspect until the little grey cells say otherwise." The night deepened, and the villa grew quiet. Poirot sat by the fire, his eyes half closed, his mind a whirlwind of clues and questions. The lead piping, the oversized overcoat, the love letter, Jack Renaud's absence, Madame d'Aubreuil's shadowy figure, they all danced in his thoughts, forming patterns only he could see. Giraud might have his modern methods, but Poirot trusted in the power of observation, deduction, and the relentless pursuit of truth. As Hastings retired to his room, Poirot remained by the fire, a small smile playing on his lips. The wager with Giraud was a game, yes, but it was also a challenge, a chance to prove once again that the little grey cells were unmatched. The golf course murder was far from solved, but Poirot felt the first stirrings of clarity, the first threads of the tapestry coming together. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and Hercule Poirot would find it. No matter how clever the killer thought they were, the chapter continued to unfold. Over the next few days, with Poirot and Giraud circling each other like duelists, each pursuing their own path to the truth, Giraud's inquiries led him to a local tavern, where he interrogated the barkeep about any strangers seen in Mernonville the night of the murder. The barkeep, a grizzled man with a penchant for gossip, mentioned a man in a dark coat who had lingered near the villa 2 nights before, a detail that sent Giraud racing off to follow the lead. Poirot, meanwhile, took a more methodical approach. He interviewed the groundskeeper of the golf course, a weary old man named Pierre. who confirmed that the lead piping was not part of the course's equipment. Never seen it before, Pierre said, scratching his head. Looks like something from a construction site, maybe. This revelation intrigued Poirot. Why would a piece of lead piping, foreign to the golf course, be found so close to the body? He filed the information away, adding it to his growing collection of clues. He also visited the local post office where he learned that Paul Renaud had received a letter the day before his death, not the one summoning Poirot, but another, postmarked from Paris. The postmaster couldn't recall the sender, but the detail gnawed at Poirot's mind. Who else had been in contact with Renaud and why? Hastings, ever eager to contribute, spent his days trailing Poirot and occasionally striking out on his own. He returned to the golf course one afternoon, hoping to catch another glimpse of the mysterious Cinderella. To his disappointment, she was nowhere to be found, but he did overhear a conversation between two golfers about a strange woman seen near the 7th hole the night of the murder. Dressed all in black, she was, one golfer said, looked like she was up to no good. Hastings reported this to Poirot, who listened with keen interest. A woman in black, you say? Most interesting, Hastings. We must consider whether this is our Madame d'Aubreuil or another player in this drama. As the investigation progressed, the rivalry between Poirot and Giraud intensified. Giraud announced triumphantly one morning that he had located Jack Renaud in Calais, staying at a small hotel under an assumed name. He's running, Poirot, Giraud said, his eyes gleaming. A guilty man always runs. Poirot, however, was unconvinced. Running, yes, but from what? Guilt, fear, or something else entirely. We must speak with Monsieur Jack before we judge him. The news of Jack's whereabouts sent a ripple through the case, and Poirot arranged to travel to Calais the following day. Before they left, however, another clue emerged. A groundskeeper found a torn piece of paper near the golf course, bearing a single word in elegant handwriting, Beraldi. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he read it, his mind racing back to a case from decades past, one that had haunted the annals of French crime. The Beraldi case, could it be connected? As Poirot and Hastings prepared to depart for Calais, Giraud remained in Merlinville, determined to pursue his own leads. I'll have this case wrapped up by the time you return, he boasted, waving his notebook. You'll see, Poirot, modern methods always win. Poirot merely smiled, adjusting his hat. We shall see, Monsieur Giraud. We shall see. Chapter 4. Eloise's Talith morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of the Villa Genevieve, casting delicate patterns across the parlour where Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings sat opposite. Eloise Renaud. The air was heavy with the scent of lavender from a vase on the mantelpiece, but the atmosphere was anything but serene. Eloise, dressed in a sombre black gown, clutched a handkerchief, her pale face etched with grief, or so it seemed to Poirot's discerning eye. Her hands trembled slightly as she dabbed at her eyes, though Poirot noted the absence of tears. Madame Renaud, Poirot began, his voice gentle yet probing. I understand this is a most distressing time, but if we are to find the truth of your husband's death, I must ask you to recount the events of that terrible night. Every detail, no matter how small, may be of importance. Eloise nodded, her lips quivering. Of course, Monsieur Poirot, I will do my best. She took a deep breath as if steeling herself, and began her tale. It was late, perhaps around midnight. Paul, my husband, was restless. He often was, you see, since we moved to Merlinville. He said it was the business, always the business, keeping him awake. I had gone to bed earlier, but he stayed up, pacing in his study. I heard him, moving about, his footsteps heavy on the floorboards. Hastings leaned forward, his notebook open, pen poised. And then what happened, madam? Eloise's eyes flickered to Hastings, then back to Poirot. I was awakened by a noise, a crash, like something falling. I sat up in bed, and then I heard voices, men's voices, low and harsh. I was frightened, but I called out for Paul. That's when the door to my bedroom burst open, and two men came in. They were masked, Monsieur Poirot, with black cloths covering their faces, only their eyes visible. They were rough, their voices foreign, Spanish perhaps, or South American. I couldn't be sure. Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, a sign Hastings recognized as his friend's mind sifting through her words. Masked, you say? And what did these men do? They tied me up, Eloise said, her voice breaking. They bound my hands and feet with rope and gagged me with a cloth. I struggled, but they were too strong. One of them, he had a scar on his hand. I saw it when he adjusted the gag, said they would take Paul and that I mustn't scream, or they'd come back for me. I was terrified, Monsieur Poirot. I thought they'd kill us both. And your husband? Poirot pressed. Did you see him with these men? Eloise shook her head. No, they took him away. I heard him shouting, struggling, as they dragged him out of the house. Then there was silence, and I was left alone, tied up, unable to move. It wasn't until the maid found me in the morning that I was freed. By then, Paul was... Her voice trailed off, and she buried her face in her handkerchief. Poirot's green eyes narrowed slightly. A most harrowing experience, madam. And you are certain these men spoke with foreign accents? Spanish, you said. Yes, or something like it. I'm not certain. It all happened so quickly. Eloise's voice was faint, almost a whisper. Hastings scribbled furiously, his brow furrowed. And no one else was in the house, not your son, Jack, or any of the servants. No, Jack was away. Paul had sent him to Paris on some errand, and the chauffeur was gone too. Only the female servants were here, and they sleep in the annex at the back of the villa. They heard nothing until morning. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his finger steepled. Curious, is it not, Hastings, that Monsieur Renaud should send away his son and chauffeur, leaving the house so vulnerable? And these masked men, how convenient that they should strike on such a night. Hastings glanced at Poirot, catching the glint in his eye. You think there's more to it, Poirot? There is always more, mon ami, Poirot replied softly. Madame Renaud, permit me one more question. This village is isolated, yes, yet you have a neighbour, I believe. A Madame d'Aubreuil? Eloise's expression shifted, a flicker of unease crossing her face before she composed herself. Yes, Madame d'Aubreuil lives nearby, a widow. I believe. She keeps to herself, mostly. We've spoken only a few times, and yet, Poirot said, his tone deceptively casual, I have heard that Madame d'Aubreuil recently deposited a rather large sum of money in her bank. A curious detail. Would you not agree? Eloise's hands tightened on her handkerchief. I wouldn't know about that, Monsieur Poirot. I don't concern myself with my neighbour's affairs. Of course, Poirot said, rising with a small bow. You have been most helpful, madam. We will leave you to rest now. But rest assured, Hercule Poirot will find the truth. As they stepped out of the villa into the bright sunlight, Hastings turned to Poirot, his face alight with curiosity. Well, Poirot, what do you make of it? Masked intruders, foreign accents. A kidnapping in the dead of night, it's like something out of a novel. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. A novel, perhaps, but one with too many loose pages, Hastings. Madame Renaud's story, it is dramatic, yes, but it does not entirely satisfy. There are inconsistencies, mon ami, threads that do not align. Inconsistencies, Hastings frowned. She seemed genuinely distressed. Distress can be performed, Poirot said, tapping his temple. The little grey cells. They tell me something is amiss. Consider. Why would masked intruders, so careful to cover their faces, allow Madame Renaud to see a scar on one's hand? Why send away the son and chauffeur, leaving only female servants who conveniently hear nothing? And this Madame d'Aubreuil, her sudden wealth is a piece of the puzzle that does not yet fit. They walked along the gravel path toward the golf course where Renaud's body had been found. The air was warm, the sky a brilliant blue, but the idyllic setting did little to dispel the chill of the mystery. Poirot paused, gazing out at the rolling green fairways. This golf course, Hastings, it is the stage for our drama. A shallow grave, a body in an oversized overcoat, a cryptic love letter. These are not random details. They are clues, Carefully placed, if only we can read them. Hastings nodded, though his mind was still on Eloise's tale. Do you think she's lying, Poirot? About the masked men? Not lying, perhaps, Poirot said, but not telling the whole truth. There is something she holds back, something she fears to reveal. And then there is this Madame d'Aubreuil. I must learn more about her. A woman who deposits a large sum of money at such a time. She is no mere bystander. They continued their walk, Poirot's eyes scanning the ground as if he might find another clue hidden in the grass. Hastings, meanwhile, was lost in thought, replaying Eloise's story in his mind. The image of two masked men, their foreign voices echoing in the night, was vivid, almost vivid. He wondered if Poirot was right, if there was more to the story. Then Eloise was willing to share as they reached the edge of the golf course. Poirot stopped abruptly, his gaze fixed on a small cottage in the distance. It was a charming little house, surrounded by roses with a well-kept garden. That, I presume, is the residence of Madame d'Aubreuil, Poirot said. Come, Hastings, let us pay a visit. Perhaps the mysterious neighbour can shed light on our mystery. The cottage was quiet as they approached, the only sound the hum of bees in the garden. Poirot knocked on the door, and after a moment it opened to reveal a woman in her late 40s. Her dark hair streaked with silver, her eyes sharp and assessing. She wore a simple but elegant dress, and her demeanour was one of poised reserve. Madame d'Aubreuil, Poirot said, bowing slightly. I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my associate, Captain Hastings. We are investigating the unfortunate death of Monsieur Renaud. May we have a moment of your time? Madame d'Aubreuil's expression remained neutral, though her eyes flickered with something wariness. Perhaps. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. Please come in. The interior of the cottage was as elegant as its owner, with tasteful furnishings, and a faint scent of jasmine. Madame d'Aubreuil gestured for them to sit, then took a seat herself, her hands folded calmly in her lap. I was sorry to hear about Monsieur Renaud, she said. A terrible tragedy, indeed, Poirot said, his tone polite but probing. You knew the Renauds, I presume? Only in passing, she replied. We exchanged pleasantries, as neighbours do, but we were not close, and yet, Poirot said, leaning forward slightly, you were seen at the Villa Genevieve, the day before Monsieur Renaud's death. A curious coincidence. Would you not agree? Madame d'Aubreuil's composure faltered for a moment, but she recovered quickly. I don't recall visiting the villa, she said smoothly. Perhaps. You are mistaken. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Perhaps. But tell me, madam, have you lived in Merlinville long? Some years, she said. I came here after my husband's death. It is a quiet place, good for reflection, and for banking, it seems, Poirot said, his voice light but his eyes sharp. A large sum of money deposited recently. May I ask the source of this wealth? Madame d'Aubreuil's lips tightened. That, Monsieur Poirot, is a private matter. I see no reason to discuss my finances with you. Of course, Poirot said, rising. I apologize for the intrusion, but rest assured, madam, Hercule Poirot does not ask questions without reason. Thank you for your time. As they left the cottage, Hastings could barely contain his excitement. Poirot, she's hiding something. Did you see how she reacted when you mentioned the money? I saw, mon ami, Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. Madame d'Aubreuil is a woman of secrets. But secrets, like clues, have a way of revealing themselves to Hercule Poirot. They returned to the villa where Poirot spent the afternoon, poring over the details of the case, his mind working tirelessly to connect the dots. Hastings, meanwhile, found himself haunted by Eloise's story, The Masked Men, the scar, the foreign accents. It was a tale straight out of a melodrama, and yet something about it rang false. He couldn't shake the feeling that Poirot was right, that there was more to the story than Eloise had told Dot as evening fell. Poirot summoned Hastings to the parlour. I have been thinking, mon ami, he said, his eyes gleaming. This case it is like a golf game. Each clue is a stroke, each suspect a player. But the whole, the truth, is still out of sight. We must play carefully, Hastings, and watch for the hazards. "What's our next move, then?" Hastings asked. Poirot's smile was sly. "We dig deeper, mon ami, into Madame d'Aubrel's past, into Eloise's story, into the heart of this mystery. Tomorrow we will speak to the servants, and perhaps we will find the missing piece of our puzzle." The night was quiet, the villa shrouded in darkness, but for Poirot, the case was only beginning to take shape. The little grey cells were at work, and the truth, he knew, was waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 5. The mysterious Cinderella morning sun cast a golden sheen over Merlinville-sur-Mer, its rays filtering through the lace curtains of the Villa Genevieve, where Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings had taken up temporary residence. The small seaside town, with its quaint charm and rolling dunes, seemed an unlikely stage for murder, yet the events of the past days had shattered its tranquil Fawade. Paul Renaud's brutal death on the golf course had set tongues wagging, and the arrival of the famed Belgian detective had only heightened the local intrigue. Hastings, ever the romantic, found his thoughts drifting not to the grim details of the case, but to a chance encounter that had left his heart unexpectedly stirred. It had been late the previous evening as Poirot and Hastings returned from their initial inspection of the crime scene that Hastings first saw her. She had appeared almost out of nowhere, stepping lightly along the cobbled path that wound through the town's modest promenade. Her hair, a cascade of auburn curls, caught the fading light, and her eyes bright, mischievous, and yet somehow guarded, had met his for the briefest of moments. She had introduced herself with a playful smile, calling herself Cinderella, a name that seemed as much a jest as it was a mystery. Hastings, ever susceptible to a charming face, had been instantly smitten, though Poirot, with his usual perspicacity, had noted the encounter with a raised eyebrow and a cryptic remark about the dangers of distraction. Now, as they sat in the villa's airy drawing-room, Poirot was engrossed in a small notebook, his pencil moving with deliberate precision as he jotted down observations. Hastings, however, was far less focused, his gaze drifting to the window, as he replayed the encounter in his mind. The woman's voice, light and teasing, had carried an undercurrent of knowledge, as if she knew more about the Renaud affair than she let on. Her sudden disappearance into the evening shadows had only deepened the enigma. "Poirot," Hastings ventured, breaking the silence, "do you think it possible that this Cinderella might have some connection to the case? She seemed awfully familiar with the goings-on here." Poirot did not look up from his notebook. "Mon ami," he said, his voice tinged with amusement, "you are, as ever, quick to let your heart lead your head. This Cinderella of yours, tell me, what precisely did she say that makes you suspect her involvement?" Hastings flushed slightly, aware that his enthusiasm might be clouding his judgment. "Well, it wasn't so much what she said as how she said it. She mentioned the golf course almost casually, as if she knew something about the murder, and there was a certain knowingness in her manner. Don't you find that suspicious?" Poirot set down his pencil and fixed Hastings with a piercing gaze. "Everything, Hastings, is suspicious until it is not. A woman who calls herself Cinderella and appears at dusk to charm a susceptible Englishman, this is not without interest, but suspicion none, not yet. We must have facts, not fancies. Describe her again, if you please, and leave nothing out." Hastings leaned forward, eager to comply. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with auburn hair and green eyes, quite striking, really. She wore a simple dress, blue, I think, with a shawl draped over her shoulders. Her accent was English, but there was a hint of something else, perhaps a touch of French. She spoke of the town as if she knew it well, and when I mentioned we were here for the Renaud case, she smiled and said, "Oh, the golf course affair. Quite the puzzle, isn't it?" Then she excused herself and vanished before I could ask her name, her real name, I mean. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. A puzzle, she called it. Curious. "And you say she vanished into thin air, or merely into the crowd?" "Well, not exactly thin air," Hastings admitted. "She turned down a side street, and by the time I thought to follow, she was gone. It was as if she didn't want to be questioned too closely. Or perhaps," Poirot mused, "she had somewhere to be." Tell me, Hastings, did she carry anything, a bag, a parcel, anything that might suggest her purpose? Hastings frowned, trying to recall. She had a small reticule, I think, but nothing unusual. Oh, and she was wearing a brooch of silver, one shaped like a crescent moon. It caught my eye because it seemed out of place with her otherwise simple attire. Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on the arm of his chair. A crescent moon. A symbol, perhaps, or merely a trinket. We should keep this Cinderella in mind, Hastings. For now, let us return to the matter at hand. The murder of Monsieur Renaud is a tapestry of many threads, and we must not let a charming stranger distract us from untangling them. But Hastings, try as he might, could not shake the image of the mysterious woman from his thoughts. Over the next few days, as Poirot methodically pursued his inquiries, Hastings found himself scanning the streets of Merlinville, hoping for another glimpse of her. The town was small, its population a mix of locals and summer visitors, yet she seemed to have melted into its fabric as effortlessly as a shadow. Meanwhile, Poirot's investigation was gaining momentum, and the Belgian detective's relentless focus on detail was beginning to yield results. Their days were filled with interviews and observations. Poirot had already questioned Eloise Renaud, whose tale of masked intruders had left him skeptical, and he had taken a particular interest in Madame d'Aubrac, the enigmatic neighbor whose recent financial windfall raised questions. The golf course itself remained a focal point, its manicured fairways and sandy bunkers concealing clues that Poirot was determined to unearth. Hastings, though diligent in his role as Poirot's companion, found his attention divided, his thoughts returning again and again to the woman who called herself Cinderella. It was on the third day after their arrival that Hastings' persistence was rewarded. He had been dispatched to the local post office to inquire about any letters or packages addressed to the Renaud household, a task Poirot deemed essential to understanding the victim's final days. As Hastings stepped out into the bustling square, he caught sight of a familiar figure near a flower stall. The auburn hair, the graceful posture, it was her. She was examining a bouquet of roses, her expression thoughtful, and for a moment Hastings hesitated. Should he approach her directly, or would that scare her off? Deciding boldness was the better course, he crossed the square and called out, "Excuse me, Miss Cinderella, isn't it?" She turned, her green eyes widening in surprise before a smile curved her lips. "Captain Hastings, I presume," she said, her tone light but with that same knowing edge. "You've been asking about me, haven't you?" Hastings felt a flush creep up his neck. That is, I couldn't help but wonder who you were. You seemed to know something about the Renaud case, and you thought I might be a key to the mystery," she finished, her smile widening. "How very like a detective's friend. Tell me, does Monsieur Poirot share your curiosity about me?" "He's aware of you," Hastings said cautiously, unsure how much to reveal. "But I'd like to know more. Your name, for instance. Cinderella is charming, but it's hardly a proper introduction." She laughed. "I sound like the chime of a bell. You're persistent, I'll give you that. Very well. Since you've caught me, I suppose I can offer you something. My name is Dulce Duveen, but I rather like Cinderella, don't you? It has a certain mystique." Dulce Duveen, Hastings repeated, committing the name to memory. "And what brings you to Merlinville, Miss Duveen? You don't strike me as a typical holiday-maker." Her expression grew guarded, though her smile remained. "Oh, I'm just passing through. A bit of a wanderer, you might say. But I've heard the talk about the golf course murder, and I must admit, it's intriguing. Poor Monsieur Renaud, what a dreadful way to go." Hastings seized the opportunity. "You seem to know more about it than most. Have you heard anything specific? Anything that might help us?" Dulce tilted her head. "Considering him, you're very direct, Captain. I like that, but I'm afraid I'm not one for gossip. I will say this, though Merlinville is full of secrets, and not all of them are buried on the golf course. You might want to look closer at the people around Monsieur Renaud. Not everyone is what they seem. Before Hastings could press her further, she glanced at her watch and gasped softly. "Oh, dear, I'm late. It was a pleasure, Captain, but I must be off. Perhaps we'll meet again." With a wink, she turned and slipped into the crowd, leaving Hastings staring after her, a mix of frustration and fascination swirling in his chest. That evening, as he recounted the encounter to Poirot, Hastings could barely contain his excitement. "Her name is Dulcie Duveen, Poirot, and she knows something, I'm sure of it. She hinted at secrets, said we should look closer at Renaud's circle. Could she be involved somehow?" Poirot listened intently, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Dulcie Duveen," he murmured. "A name that is not unfamiliar, perhaps, and her advice, while vague, is not without merit. The circle of Monsieur Renaud is indeed a tangled web. His wife, his son, his neighbour. His servants all have their roles to play. But this Mademoiselle Duveen, she is an unexpected piece. On the board. Do you think she's connected to the case?" Hastings asked, leaning forward. Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Everything is connected, Hastings, until proven otherwise. But let us consider her words. Not everyone is what they seem, a truism, perhaps, but one that resonates. We must look beyond the surface, beyond the masks people wear. And you, mon ami, must guard your heart. This Cinderella may be charming, but charm can be a dangerous weapon." Over the next few days, Poirot's investigation deepened. He interviewed the female servants at the Villa Genevieve, confirming that Renaud had sent his son Jack and the chauffeur away on the eve of the murder, leaving only the women in the household. This struck Poirot as significant, though he kept his thoughts to himself, merely noting the fact in his ever-present notebook. He also paid a visit to Madame d'Aubrac, whose cool demeanour and evasive answers only heightened his suspicions. The large sum of money she had recently deposited in her bank account was, in Poirot's view, no coincidence. Meanwhile, Hastings found himself increasingly preoccupied with Dulcie Duveen. He spotted her twice more, once near the golf course, where she seemed to be studying the terrain, and once in a cafe, where she was reading a newspaper with an article about the murder prominently displayed. Each time, she greeted him with that same playful smile, but her answers to his questions remained elusive. She spoke of the town's history, of its visitors and its scandals, but never directly about the Renaud case, yet her presence, her uncanny knack for appearing at pivotal moments, convinced Hastings that she was more than a bystander. Poirot, for his part, was beginning to form a theory. The oversized overcoat found on Renaud's body, the cryptic love letter in the pocket, the piece of lead piping at the crime scene, all were pieces of a puzzle that he was determined to solve. He had also learned of an unknown visitor to the villa the day before the murder, a detail that the servants had initially overlooked. When he shared this with Hastings, the younger man's thoughts immediately turned to Dulcie. Could it have been her, Poirot? The visitor, I mean. She seems to know so much, and she's always nearby. Poirot shook his head. Possible, but unlikely. The visitor was described as a man, tall and well-dressed. Mademoiselle Duveen, charming though she may be, does not fit that description. But her presence in Merlinville is no accident, I think. We must learn more about her past, her connections. And you, Hastings, must not let your admiration blind you to the truth. As the days passed, the case grew more complex. Monsieur Giraud, the brash young detective from the street, continued to pursue his own line of inquiry, dismissing Poirot's methods as outdated. He focused on Jack Renaud, whose absence on the night of the murder and strained relationship with his father made him a prime suspect. Poirot, however, was unconvinced, his attention drawn to the subtle inconsistencies in Eloise Renaud's story and the curious behavior of Madame d'Aubrac. One evening, as Poirot and Hastings walked along the cliffs overlooking the sea, the detective paused to gaze out at the horizon. This case, Hastings, is like the golf course itself, full of hazards and hidden traps. But the truth is there, waiting to be uncovered. Your Cinderella, she is a clue, but not the solution. We must follow the threads, no matter where they lead. Hastings nodded, though his thoughts were elsewhere. Dulcie Duveen, with her enigmatic smile and cryptic words, had become as much a part of the mystery as the murder itself. He resolved to find her again to uncover her secrets, even as he followed Poirot's lead in unraveling the tangled web of the Renault case. The investigation continued, with Poirot's meticulous methods slowly peeling back the layers of deception. He learned of a past case, some 22 years old, involving a woman named Madame Beraldy and her lover, Georges Queneau, who had conspired to murder her husband in a plot eerily similar to the present one. The connection to Madame d'Aubreuil was inescapable, and Poirot began to suspect that the key to the murder lay not in the present, but in the shadows of the past daughters for Hastings. His encounters with Dulcie grew more frequent, each one leaving him more captivated and more confused. She spoke of the golf course as if it held secrets beyond the murder, hinting at meetings and promises made in the moonlight, yet she never revealed her true purpose. And Hastings began to wonder if Poirot was right, if her charm was indeed a mask for something deeper. One night, unable to sleep, Hastings slipped out of the villa and wandered toward the golf course, drawn by an instinct he could not explain. The moon hung low, casting long shadows across the fairways, and as he reached the spot where Renault's body had been found, he saw her. Dulcie stood alone, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the shallow grave. For a moment, Hastings thought to call out, but something in her posture tense, almost mournful, held him back. "Dulcie," he said softly, stepping forward. She turned, startled, but her expression softened when she saw him. "Captain Hastings, you do have a knack for finding me. What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice gentle but insistent. "This isn't a place for a midnight stroll." She hesitated, then sighed. "I suppose I owe you some truth. I knew Paul Renault not well, but enough to know he was a man with enemies. I came to Merlinville because I had to know what happened. But I'm not your killer, Captain. I'm just someone caught up in this mess like you." Her words were earnest, but Hastings sensed she was holding back. Before he could press her, she stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "Be careful, Arthur. This case, it's dangerous. Not everyone wants the truth to come out." With that, she turned and slipped into the darkness. Leaving Hastings alone with the wind and the whispers of the golf course, he returned to the villa, his mind racing, determined to share this latest encounter with Poirot. The mysterious Cinderella was no mere bystander, he was certain of it. But what was her role in this deadly game? Only Poirot, with his little grey cells, could hope to uncover the truth. As the investigation drew closer to its climax, Hastings found himself torn between his loyalty to Poirot and his fascination with Dulcie Duveen. The threads of the case were beginning to converge, and the Belgian detective's sharp mind was piecing together a picture that would soon reveal the killer. But for Hastings, the mystery of Cinderella remained a puzzle within a puzzle, one that would challenge his heart as much as his head. The days ahead would bring revelations, betrayals, and a resolution that would shake Merlinville to its core. For now, though, the golf course held its secrets, and the woman called Cinderella remained an enigma, her true place in the story yet to be revealed. Chapter 6. Clues and Suspicions. The morning sun cast a golden sheen over the manicured lawns of Merlinville-sur-Mer, its rays filtering through the tall windows of the Villa Genevieve, where Hercule Poirot sat in quiet contemplation. The air was thick with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, and the faint clink of porcelain cups punctuated the silence. As Captain Hastings poured himself a second serving, Poirot's eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned a small notebook in his hand, its pages filled with meticulous notes written in his precise, elegant script. The murder of Paul Renault was a puzzle, and Poirot was determined to fit each piece into its proper place. Hastings, ever the eager companion, leaned forward in his chair, his brow furrowed. "Poirot, you've been awfully quiet this morning. Have you made any sense of this ghastly affair? The man's dead, stabbed on a golf course of all places, and his wife's story about masked intruders sounds like something out of a penny dreadful." Poirot closed his notebook with a deliberate snap and fixed Hastings with a look That was equal parts amusement and reproach. Mon ami, the human mind is a curious thing. It seeks the sensational, the dramatic, when often the truth lies in the mundane. The story of Madame Renaud may indeed sound like fiction, but it is in the details, the small, overlooked details, that we shall find our answers. Hastings frowned, stirring his coffee absently. Details? What details? The man was found in a shallow grave, wearing an overcoat far too large for him, with a love letter in his pocket. If that's not sensational, I don't know what is. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Precisely, Hastings. The overcoat, the letter, the grave, these are not mere theatrics. They are clues, each one a thread in the tapestry of this crime. And now, we have learned something new. Monsieur Renaud sent his son, Jack, and the chauffeur away before the murder, leaving only the female servants in the villa. Why? And who was this mysterious visitor who came to the villa the day before? His death. Hastings leaned back, his expression one of reluctant admiration. You've got a point, as usual. But where do we start? The police are crawling all over the place, and that Giraud fellow seems to think he's got the case all but solved. Poirot's eyes gleamed with a spark of mischief. Monsieur Giraud is a man of action, Hastings, but action without thought is like a cart without a horse. He searches for footprints and cigarette ends, but he neglects the little grey cells. We, however, shall proceed methodically. Come, let us visit the villa once more. There are questions that demand answers. The Villa Genevieve stood at the edge of Merlinville, a grand structure of white stone and ivy, its gardens meticulously tended despite the grim events that had unfolded. As Poirot and Hastings approached, they were greeted by the sight of a gendarme stationed at the gate, his expression dour as he waved them through. Inside, the villa was a flurry of activity. Servants moved quietly, their faces drawn, while a pair of police officers stood in the hall, discussing the case in hushed tones. Poirot's attention, however, was drawn to the drawing-room where Madame Eloise Renaud sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She was a striking woman, her dark hair streaked with silver, her eyes shadowed with grief or perhaps something else. Poirot bowed politely as he entered, Hastings trailing behind. Madame Renaud, Poirot began, his voice soft but firm. I regret the necessity of intruding upon your sorrow, but there are matters that require clarification. May we speak? Eloise nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I have told the police everything I know, but I will answer your questions as best I can. Poirot seated himself across from her, his posture impeccable. Merci, madame. Let us begin with the night of your husband's death. You have said that two masked men entered the villa, tied you up, and took Monsieur Renaud away. Can you recall any further details about these men, their voices, perhaps, or their manner of movement? Eloise's hands trembled slightly, and she clasped them tighter. It was dark, Monsieur Poirot, and I was terrified. Their voices were low, rough foreign, perhaps. One of them was taller, I think, and he moved quickly like a man accustomed to action. The other was shorter, stockier, but I saw so little. Poirot's eyes narrowed, though his expression remained gentle. And yet, madam, you were able to free yourself from your bonds. How did you manage this? Her gaze faltered, and she looked down at her hands. The ropes were not tied tightly. After they left, I struggled and managed to work them loose. It took some time, but I was able to free myself and raise the alarm. Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled before him. Most interesting. And, tell me, madam, what of this visitor who came to the villa the day before your husband's death? Did you see this person? Eloise hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the window. No, I did not. My husband mentioned a caller, but he did not say who it was. He seemed preoccupied afterward, but I thought nothing of it at the time. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. And yet, madam, your husband took the unusual step of sending his son and the chauffeur away, leaving only the female servants in the house. Did he give a reason for this? Eloise's face paled, and for a moment it seemed she might not answer. He said, He said it was a matter of business, that he needed privacy. I did not question him. Paul was a man who kept his own counsel. Poirot sat back, his expression unreadable. Merci, madam. You have been most helpful. As they left the drawing-room, Hastings whispered, "What do you make of that, Poirot?" She seemed nervous, didn't she? Do you think she's hiding something? Poirot's lips twitched. My dear Hastings, everyone is hiding something. The question is whether it is relevant to our inquiry. Madame Renaud's story is consistent, but there are cracks in its small inconsistencies that betray a deeper truth. We must dig deeper. Their next stop was the servants' quarters, where Poirot questioned the two maids, Francoise and Denise. Both were young, nervous women, their eyes wide as they recounted the events of the night. Francoise, the elder of the two, spoke first. "We heard nothing, monsieur. I swear it," she said, twisting her apron in her hands. "Madame screamed in the night, and we ran to her, but by then the master was gone. The house was quiet until then, no sounds of a struggle, nothing." Denise nodded vigorously. "It's true, monsieur. We were asleep in our rooms at the back of the house. If there were intruders, they were very quiet." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "And the day before, this visitor did either. If you see them," the maids exchanged a glance. Francois spoke hesitantly. "I saw someone, monsieur, but only from a distance. A woman, I think, with dark hair. She came to the front door, and the master spoke with her in the study. I didn't hear what they said." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "A woman, you say? Most interesting. And did Monsieur Renaud seem distressed after this visit?" Francois nodded. "He was agitated, monsieur. He told us to stay out of the study and sent young Monsieur Jack and the chauffeur away that evening. We thought it strange, but it was not our place to question." Poirot thanked the maids and led Hastings back to the garden, where they could speak without being overheard. The air was warm, the scent of roses mingling with the salt of the nearby sea. Hastings paced, his hands in his pockets. A woman visitor, he mused. Could it be this Madame d'Aubray you mentioned, the one who deposited all that money? Poirot's eyes twinkled. "You are beginning to think, Hastings. Yes, it is possible. Madame d'Aubray is a figure of great interest in this case. Her sudden wealth, her proximity to the villa, her mysterious past, these are not coincidences. But we must be cautious. Assumptions are the enemy of truth." Hastings stopped pacing and turned to Poirot. "What about the servant's story? They heard nothing, saw nothing. It's almost too convenient, don't you think? And that business about the ropes not being tied tightly, surely that's suspicious." Poirot nodded slowly. "Indeed, it is. The absence of noise, the ease with which Madame Renaud freed herself, these are not the hallmarks of a violent kidnapping. And yet the body of Monsieur Renaud lies in a shallow grave, wearing an overcoat that does not fit, with a love letter in his pocket. Why? What was he doing on that golf course? And who wished him dead?" Hastings threw up his hands. "You're asking more questions than you're answering, Poirot." Poirot chuckled softly. "Patience, mon ami. The questions are the path to the answers. Let us consider the facts. Monsieur Renaud sends away his son and chauffeur, leaving the villa vulnerable. A woman visits him, and he is agitated. That night, he is taken or goes willingly to the golf course, where he is stabbed and buried. The overcoat, the letter, the grave, these are deliberate, designed to tell a story. But whose story?" Hastings frowned. "You think Renaud planned this himself? But why? To fake his own death?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "An interesting theory, Hastings. Not impossible. But we must consider the motive. If Renaud wished to disappear, why the elaborate scene? Why the letter, the overcoat? No, I believe there is more here than meets the eye. We must learn more about this visitor, about Madame d'Aubray, and about the past of Monsieur Renaud himself." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Monsieur Giraud, the street detective, striding across the lawn with an air of self-assured confidence. His sharp features were set in a smirk as he approached, his hands thrust into the pockets of his impeccably tailored coat. "Monsieur, Poirot, Giraud said, his tone dripping with condescension, still poking about. I see. Have you found any of your precious clues yet, or are you still relying on your little grey cells? Poirot's smile was polite but edged with steel. Monsieur Giraud, I find that the grey cells are far more reliable than footprints in the grass. But tell me, have you made progress in your investigation? Giraud's smirk widened. As a matter of fact, I have. I've been looking into young Jack Renaud's whereabouts. The boy's been acting cagey, and I've got a witness who saw him near the golf course on the night of the murder. Mark my words. Poirot, that lad's got something to hide. Poirot's expression remained impassive. An interesting theory, Monsieur Giraud, but I would caution you against rushing to judgment. The truth, like a fine wine, requires time to reveal its full flavour. Giraud snorted. Keep your metaphors, Poirot. I'll have this case wrapped up before you've finished. Your coffee. Care to make it interesting, a wager, perhaps? The first to name the killer wins. Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. A wager? Very well, Monsieur Giraud. But I warn you, I do not lose. As Giraud strode away, Hastings shook his head. That man's insufferable. Do you think he's right about Jack? Poirot shrugged. He may be right about Jack's presence, but presence is not guilt. We must learn more about the boy's movements, his relationship with his father, and this mysterious Cinderella. You met? She, too, is a piece of the puzzle. The mention of Cinderella brought a flush to Hastings' cheeks. She's a charming girl, Poirot, but I don't see how she could be involved. She seemed, well, innocent. Poirot's smile was indulgent. My dear Hastings, your heart is as open as a book, and just as easily read. But do not let your feelings cloud your judgment. This Cinderella knows more than she has told you. We must find her and learn her secrets. The day wore on, with Poirot and Hastings visiting the golf course once more. The shallow grave where Renaud's body had been found was now cordoned off, the earth still disturbed from the police's excavations. Poirot knelt beside it, his gloved hands sifting through the soil with care. "What are you looking for?" Hastings asked, crouching beside him. Poirot's fingers paused, and he held up a small, glinting object, a fragment of glass no larger than a thumbnail. This, Hastings, a piece of glass, perhaps from a vial or a bottle. It was buried near the grave, overlooked by our friend Giraud. Hastings peered at it. A vial. You think it's important? Poirot slipped the fragment into a small envelope. Everything is important until it is proven otherwise. This glass may tell us nothing, or it may tell us everything. We shall see. As they returned to the villa, Poirot's mind was a whirlwind of possibilities. The visitor, the glass, the overcoat, the letter, each was a thread, and he was determined to weave them together. But there was another thread, one that tugged at the edges of his consciousness, the past of Paul Renaud. What secrets had the man carried to his grave? And how did they connect to the enigmatic Madame d'Aubrac? That evening, Poirot sat in his room at the Hettledew Fair, poring over his notes. Hastings, restless as ever, paced the floor. "What's next, Poirot?" "We've got a mysterious visitor, a piece of glass, and a love letter that makes no sense. Where do we go from here?" Poirot looked up, his eyes bright with determination. "We go to the heart of the matter, Hastings. Tomorrow we shall pay a visit to Madame d'Aubrac. If she is, as I suspect, connected to this crime, she will not escape the scrutiny of Hercule Poirot." Hastings nodded, though his expression was sceptical. "I hope you're right, Poirot. This case is getting murkier by the minute." Poirot smiled, closing his notebook with a flourish. "Murkiness, mon ami, is merely the fog that hides the truth. And I, Hercule Poirot, am very good at clearing the fog." The next morning, Poirot and Hastings set out for the Villa Marguerite, the home of Madame d'Aubrac. The villa was smaller than the Villa Genevieve, but no less elegant, its white walls gleaming in the sunlight, its gardens bursting with colour. As they approached, a woman stepped out onto the terrace, a woman of striking beauty. Her dark hair swept up in an elegant chignon, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Madame d'Aubrac, I presume?" Poirot said, bowing slightly. She inclined her head, her expression guarded. And you are Monsieur Poirot, the detective. I have heard of you. To what do I owe this visit? Poirot's smile was disarming. Merely a desire to clarify certain matters, madam. May we speak inside? Reluctantly, she led them into a tastefully furnished drawing-room, where they seated themselves on plush armchairs. Hastings watched her closely, noting the tension in her posture, the way her fingers toyed with a delicate gold bracelet on her wrist. Madam, Poirot began, you are aware, no doubt, of the tragic death of Monsieur Renaud. I am investigating the matter, and it has come to my attention that you visited the Villa Genevieve the day before his death. May I ask the purpose of your visit? Madame d'Aubrel's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained calm. I went to discuss a matter of business with Monsieur Renaud. He was considering an investment in a venture of mine. It was a brief visit, nothing more. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. A venture that required a deposit of a large sum. Of money, perhaps. I understand you recently came into a considerable amount. Her lips tightened, but she did not flinch. My financial affairs are my own, Monsieur Poirot. But yes, I have made investments, and they have been successful. Is that a crime? Not at all. Madam, Poirot said smoothly. But it is curious, is it not, that such a sum should appear so soon before Monsieur Renaud's death, and that you should visit him, only for him to send his son and chauffeur away that very evening? Madame d'Aubrel's eyes flashed with anger, but she quickly composed herself. You are fishing, Monsieur Poirot. I had nothing to do with Paul Renaud's death. If you have accusations, make them plainly. Poirot spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. Accusations, none, madam, merely questions. But I will be plain. I believe you know more about this affair than you have said, and I will find the truth, with or without your help. She rose, her movements graceful but firm. Then I wish you luck, Monsieur Poirot, but you will find nothing to implicate me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend to. As they left the villa, Hastings let out a low whistle. She's a cool customer, isn't she? Did you believe her? Poirot's expression was thoughtful. She is a woman of great control. Hastings, but control is not truth. She was not surprised by my questions, which tells me she expected them, and that, mon ami, is most revealing. They returned to the Heddle Fair, where Poirot spent the afternoon in quiet reflection, his notebook open before him. Hastings, unable to sit still, decided to take a walk along the seafront, his thoughts turning to the mysterious Cinderella. Her face, her voice, lingered in his mind, and he found himself wondering where she fit into this tangled web as he strolled. He spotted a familiar figure in the distance, a young woman with a light step and a mischievous smile. It was her, the girl who called herself Cinderella. His heart quickened, and he hurried to catch up with her. Miss Cinderella, he called, feeling foolish but determined. She turned, her eyes sparkling with amusement. Captain Hastings, fancy meeting you here. Are you still playing detective with your little friend? Hastings flushed but pressed on. I need to ask you something. You seem to know things about this case, things you haven't told me. Who are you, really? And what do you know about Paul Renaud's death? Her smile faded, and for a moment she looked almost serious. You're sweet, Captain, but you're in over your head. I'm just a girl who likes to watch the world go by. As for Monsieur Renaud, let's just say he had enemies. But you already knew that, didn't you? Before Hastings could press her further, she slipped away into the crowd, leaving him frustrated and more curious than ever. He returned to the hotel and recounted the encounter to Poirot, who listened with keen interest. So, our Cinderella is elusive, Poirot mused. But she has confirmed one thing. Renaud had enemies, and I suspect she knows who they are. We must find her again, Hastings, and persuade her to talk. The days that followed were a whirlwind of investigation. Poirot interviewed neighbors, examined bank records, and pored over the details of Renaud's life. He learned that Renaud had been a man of secrets, with connections to business dealings that were not entirely above board. The large sum deposited by Madame d'Aubreuil was traced to a Swiss account, but its origins remained murky and always in the background. Was the shadow of the past a past that Poirot was certain held the key to the murder? One evening, as the sun set over the golf course, Poirot stood once more at the sight of the shallow grave, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Hastings, ever loyal, stood beside him, his face etched with worry. "Do you think we'll ever solve this, Poirot?" he asked. "It feels like we're chasing shadows." Poirot turned to him, his expression one of quiet confidence. "Shadows, Hastings, are cast by light, and I, Hercule Poirot, am the light that will illuminate this mystery. We are close, mon ami, very close." As they walked back to the hotel, the stars began to emerge in the velvet sky, and Poirot's mind was alight with possibilities. The visitor, the glass, the overcoat, the letter, Madame d'Aubreuil, Cinderella, they were all pieces of the puzzle, and he was determined to see the picture they formed. For Hercule Poirot, there was no mystery too great, no shadow too dark. The truth was there, waiting to be uncovered, and he would not rest until it was his. Chapter 7. A second corpse of morning sun cast a golden glow over Merlinville-sur-Mer, its rays filtering through the lace curtains of the Villa Genevieve, where Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings had taken up temporary residence. The air was heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine, but the tranquillity of the French seaside town was shattered by the grim events of the past few days. Paul Renaud's murder had set the town abuzz, and Poirot's keen mind was already piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that grew more complex with each passing hour. Hastings, ever the faithful companion, sat at the breakfast table, his brow furrowed as he sipped his coffee. "Poirot," he began, setting down his cup, "this case is a devil of a mess. Renaud stabbed on the golf course, his wife's strange tale of masked intruders, and now Giraud strutting about like he's already solved it. What do you make of it all?" Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, adjusted his moustache with a delicate touch. "Mon ami, the case is indeed a tapestry of intrigue, but the threads are beginning to align. We must remain patient. The truth, it hides in the details: the oversized overcoat, the cryptic letter, the absence of young Jack Renaud. And now we await further developments. I sense the plot is about to thicken." As if on cue, a sharp knock sounded at the door. A breathless gendarme stood on the threshold, his face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, you must come at once. There's been another body found on the golf course, near where Monsieur Renaud was discovered." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Another body, you say? 'Tis interessant. Hastings, fetch your hat. We must investigate immediately. The golf course, a sprawling expanse of manicured green bordered by sandy dunes, was cordoned off by a small contingent of police. Monsieur Giraud, the young and arrogant detective from the street, was already there, barking orders with an air of self-assured superiority. His sharp features and slick-back hair gave him the appearance of a man who believed himself infallible. As Poirot and Hastings approached, Giraud's lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, come to see how a real detective works. Perhaps you'll learn something." He gestured toward a shallow depression in the ground where a tarp partially covered a lifeless form. Poirot ignored the jab, his gaze fixed on the scene. "Tell me, Monsieur Giraud, what have we here?" The gendarme who had summoned them stepped forward. "It's a man, monsieur. A tramp by the look of him. Found this morning by a groundskeeper, stabbed just like Monsieur Renaud, and with what appears to be the same weapon, a slender dagger." Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved hands carefully lifting the edge of the tarp. The tramp was clad in tattered clothing, his face weathered and gaunt. A dark stain spread across his chest, and the hilt of a dagger protruded from the wound. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he examined the scene, noting the position of the body, the surrounding grass, and the faint traces of disturbed earth. "Curio," he murmured. "The wound is precise, much like Renaud's, and yet this man's death, it does not feel the same." He turned to the gendarme. "Has the body been examined by a doctor?" "Yes, monsieur." The gendarme replied. "Dr. Durand is here. He says the man died of an epileptic seizure before he was stabbed. The wound was inflicted post-mortem. Hastings gasped. Post-mortem? You mean someone stabbed him after he was already dead? Precisement, Poirot said, rising to his feet. This complicates the timeline considerably. Why stab her? Man who is already dead. It suggests a purpose beyond murder, a message, perhaps, or a deception. Giraud scoffed. Nonsense, Poirot. This is clearly the work of the same killer. The tramp must have witnessed Renaud's murder and was silenced to protect the culprit. My men are already searching for evidence to confirm this. Poirot's mustache twitched. Your theory is direct, Monsieur Giraud. But I urge you to consider the little grey cells. The facts must guide us, not assumptions. Tell me, has anything else been found near the body? The gendarme hesitated, then produced a small evidence bag. Just this, monsieur. A piece of torn fabric caught on a nearby bush. It's coarse, not like the fine cloth of Monsieur Renaud's overcoat. Poirot examined the fabric, his fingers tracing its rough texture. This may prove significant. And the dagger, has it been confirmed as the same weapon used on Renaud? We're awaiting the coroner's report, Giraud said brusquely. But the similarity is obvious. You're wasting time with your theatrics, Poirot. I'll have this case solved before you've finished polishing your mustache. Hastings bristled, but Poirot merely smiled. We shall see, Monsieur Giraud. The truth, it does not yield to haste. As the police continued their work, Poirot and Hastings walked the perimeter of the crime scene. Poirot's eyes darting from the ground to the horizon. Hastings, he said at length, this second corpse is a puzzle within a puzzle. The tramp's death by seizure, followed by a stab wound, suggests someone wished to create the illusion of a double murder. But why? And how does it connect? To Renaud? Perhaps the tramp saw something he shouldn't have. Hastings offered. Like Giraud said, maybe he was a witness. Possible, but unlikely, Poirot replied. A witness would be killed swiftly, not staged in such a manner. No, this is deliberated distraction, or perhaps a clue left for us to misinterpret. We must learn more about this tramp. Who was he? Why was he here? Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Madame Eloise Renaud, her face pale but composed. She wore a simple black dress, a stark contrast to the vibrant woman they had met days earlier. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice trembling slightly, I heard about the second body. Is it true, another murder? Poirot inclined his head. It appears so, madam, though the circumstances are unusual. Did you know of any vagrants or strangers lingering near your villa? Eloise shook her head. No, none. Paul was particular about keeping the ground secure. He didn't trust easily. Interesting, Poirot said, and yet he sent his son and chauffeur away, leaving the villa vulnerable. Why? I wonder. Eloise's eyes flickered, but she said nothing. Poirot noted her unease and changed tack. Madam, tell me about your neighbour, Madame d'Aubray. You mentioned she visited the day before your husband's death. Did she seem unusual in any way? She was polite, as always, Eloise said carefully. She brought flowers, said she was sorry to hear Paul was unwell. But there was something, I don't know, a sharpness in her eyes. I can't explain it. Poirot nodded, filing the information away. Merci, madam. You have been most helpful. Rest assured, I will uncover the truth. As Eloise departed, Hastings leaned in. Do you think she's hiding something, Poirot? Her story about the masked intruders still doesn't sit right with me. Nor with me, mon ami, Poirot said. Her tale is like a play well rehearsed, but with flaws in the script. We must dig deeper. The day wore on, and Poirot and Hastings returned to the villa to review their findings. Poirot spread out a map of the golf course, marking the locations of both bodies. Observe, Hastings. Renaud was found here in a shallow grave he himself may have dug. The tramp, here, not far away, stabbed after death. The proximity suggests a connection. But the method, it is to deliberate. Do you think the killer is trying to throw us off Hastings asked. Perhaps, Poirot said, or perhaps they wish to tell us something. The oversized overcoat on Renaud, the love letter in his pocket, the lead piping near the first crime scene, these are not random. They are pieces of a story, and we must read it correctly. By afternoon, the coroner's preliminary report arrived, confirming that the dagger used on the tramp matched the one that killed Renaud. However, the tramp's time of death was estimated to be several hours before the stabbing, likely late the previous evening. This raised new questions. Why wait to stab a dead man? And who had access to the golf course at such an hour? Poirot decided to visit the local tavern, a likely haunt for vagrants. The barkeep, a stout man with a weathered face, recognized the description of the tramp. Aye, that'd be old Pierre, he said. Came through now and then begging for scraps. Had fits sometimes, epilepsy, I reckon. Harmless, though. Kept to himself. Did he mention seeing anyone unusual recently? Poirot asked. The barkeep scratched his chin. Come to think of it, he did say something about a fancy gent on the golf course a few nights back. Said the man was digging, acting strange. Pierre thought he was up to no good, but he didn't stick around to find out. Poirot's eyes lit up. A fancy gent, you say? Most interesting. Did Pierre describe him? Not much. Just said he was tall, well-dressed, and had a funny way of walking like he was trying not to be seen. Poirot thanked the barkeep and stepped outside, his mind racing. Hastings, this fancy gent could be our key. If Pierre saw Renaud or someone else digging on the golf course, it explains why he was killed. But the post-mortem stabbing, that is the work of someone cunning, someone who wishes to confuse us. Back at the villa, Poirot received a visitor, Dulcie Duveen, the mysterious Cinderella who had captured Hastings' heart. She was as charming as ever, her auburn hair catching the light, but her expression was serious. Monsieur Poirot, I heard about the second body. I think I saw something that night. Poirot leaned forward. Speak. Mademoiselle. Every detail matters. Dulcie hesitated. I was walking near the golf course, don't ask why. It's a long story, and I saw a man, not far from where they found the tramp. He was kneeling like he was hiding something. I couldn't see his face, but he was wearing a dark coat. I thought it was odd, but I didn't want to get involved. And when was this? Poirot pressed. Late, maybe midnight. I couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. Mademoiselle, you have done well to tell me this. Do not speak of it to anyone else, especially Monsieur Giraud. As Dulcie left, Hastings couldn't hide his concern. Poirot, do you think she's in danger? If she saw the killer, we must protect her, Hastings, Poirot said. But we must also consider her role. Is she truly an innocent bystander? Or does she know more than she claims? The day drew to a close, but Poirot's mind showed no signs of resting. He paced the villa's drawing room, muttering to himself, the tramp, the dagger, the grave, it is all connected, but how? The answer lies in Renaud's actions before his death. Why did he send his son away? Why the grave? And why the second corpse? Hastings yawned. I say, Poirot, can't this wait until morning? My head's spinning. Poirot smiled faintly. Rest, mon ami. The little grey cells, they do not sleep. Tomorrow we will pursue the truth with renewed vigour. As night fell over Merlinville-sur-Mer, the golf course lay silent, its secrets buried in the shadows. Poirot stood at the window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. The case had taken a darker turn, and the stakes were higher than ever. A second corpse meant a killer who was bold, calculating, and unafraid to strike again. But Hercule Poirot was not one to be outwitted. With his sharp intellect and unyielding determination, he would unravel the mystery of the golfing grave, no matter how many bodies it took to get there. Chapter 8. The Beraldy Connection. Hercule Poirot sat in the small, sunlit parlour of the Villa Genevieve, his hands folded neatly over his waistcoat, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar intensity that Captain Hastings had come to recognize as a sign of deep cogitation. The room, though modestly furnished, carried an air of elegance. with its polished wooden floor, and heavy drapes framing the view of the Merlinville-sur-Mer coastline. Hastings, seated across from Poirot, fidgeted slightly, his fingers drumming on the armrest of his chair. The events of the past days, the discovery of Paul Renaud's body, the cryptic clues, the rival detective Giro's smug dismissals had left him restless, eager for answers. Poirot, Hastings began, his voice tinged with impatience. You've been uncommonly quiet since we left the golf course. That second body, the tramp, surely it's no coincidence. And now this talk of Jack Renaud's arrest. I can't make heads or tails of it. What are you thinking? Poirot raised a hand, silencing his friend with a gentle but firm gesture. Mon ami, to think is to arrange the little grey cells in an orderly fashion, like soldiers on a battlefield. One does not rush into the fray without a plan. I have been considering a connection, a thread, delicate but strong, that ties this case to another long buried in the annals of crime. Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. A connection? What sort of connection? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, but his eyes remained sharp. The Beraldy case, Hastings, a drama of passion, betrayal, and murder, played out 22 years ago. It is a story that, I believe, holds the key to unlocking the mystery of Paul Renaud's death. Hastings frowned, his brow furrowing. The Beraldy case? I've never heard of it. Who are the Beraldys, and what have they to do with Renaud? Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Patience, mon cher. Allow me to recount the tale, for it is one of those curious episodes that linger in the memory of those who study crime. 22 years ago, in a small town not far from here, a man named Monsieur Beraldy met a grim fate. He was found dead, stabbed through the heart, in circumstances not unlike those we now investigate. His wife, Madame Beraldy, was at the centre of the scandal, a woman of remarkable beauty, with a charm that captivated many, including a certain Georges Queneau, her lover. Hastings' eyes widened. A lover, you say, and she killed her husband, precisement, Poirot replied, nodding. Or so it was believed at first. The case was sensational, Hastings. Madame Beraldy claimed that her husband had been killed by intruders, much as Madame Renaud claims now. She spoke of masked men, of a struggle in the night, of her own helplessness. But the police, they were not so easily convinced. They uncovered evidence of her affair with Queneau, and soon the truth emerged. Madame Beraldy and Queneau had conspired to murder her husband, staging the scene to appear as a burglary gone wrong. Hastings let out a low whistle. Good Lord, Poirot, and you think this Madame Beraldy is connected to our case? But how? Poirot's gaze drifted to the window, where the sea sparkled under the afternoon sun. Consider, Hastings, the similarities. A man stabbed and left in a shallow grave. A wife who tells a tale of masked intruders. A neighbour, Madame d'Aubreuil, who, I have learned, bears a striking resemblance to the descriptions of Madame Beraldy from those old newspaper accounts. And then there is the matter of the large sum of money deposited in her name at the local bank, a sum that appeared shortly before Renaud's death. Coincidence? I think not. Hastings sat back, his mind racing. You're saying Madame d'Aubreuil is Madame Beraldy, that she's pulled the same trick again? Poirot tilted his head, his expression enigmatic. It is a possibility, mon ami, but we must tread carefully. The past is a shadow that moves with us, but it does not always reveal its shape clearly. I have requested certain documents from the archives and Paris records of the Beraldy case. Photographs, testimonies. They will arrive tomorrow, and then we shall see if my suspicions are correct. The parlour door opened and Madame Renaud entered, her face pale but composed. She wore a simple black dress, a nod to her recent widowhood, but her eyes held a spark of determination that belied her grief. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice steady. Have you made any progress? The police, they seem convinced that my son, Jack, is guilty. It is absurd. Jack would never harm his father. Poirot rose, bowing slightly. Madam, I assure you, I am pursuing every avenue. The arrest of your son is, I believe, a hasty conclusion by Monsieur Giraud. He is a man who sees only the surface of things, like a child chasing a shiny object. But I, Hercule Poirot, look deeper. Tell me, madam, have you ever heard the name Beraldy?" Eloise Renaud's eyes flickered, a momentary shadow crossing her face. "Beraldy? No, I don't believe so." "Why do you ask?" Poirot studied her closely, his gaze piercing. "A passing thought, madam. Nothing more. But I wonder, did your husband ever speak of his past, of his life before you met? Perhaps of old acquaintances or enemies?" Eloise hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of her shawl. "Paul was a private man, Monsieur Poirot. He spoke little of his past. He said it was unimportant, that our life together was all that mattered. But—" she paused, her voice dropping. "There was one thing. A few months ago, he received a letter. It upset him greatly. He burned it in the fireplace. But I caught a glimpse of the signature, George's. I thought nothing of it at the time, but now—" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "George's, you say? Most interesting. And this letter, did it come from France?" "I believe so," Eloise replied. "The postmark was French, though I couldn't see the town." Poirot nodded, his mind clearly racing. "You see, madam, you have been most helpful. Rest assured, I shall do all in my power to clear your son's name and bring the true culprit to justice." As Eloise left the room, Hastings turned to Poirot, his excitement barely contained. "George's. That must be George's Queneau from the Beraldy case, if Madame d'Aubrel is Madame Beraldy. And Queneau is still in contact with her, then calm yourself, Hastings," Poirot interrupted, though his tone was not unkind. "We must not leap to conclusions. The name George's is not uncommon, and we have yet to confirm Madame d'Aubrel's identity. But the pieces, they begin to fit together, do they not? The letter, the money, the murder all point to a plan, a scheme that has been in motion for some time." The following morning, Poirot and Hastings made their way to the local police station, where a package from Paris awaited them. The station was a hive of activity, with officers bustling about, and Gyro's voice barking orders from a corner office. Poirot, undeterred by the chaos, retrieved the package and retreated to a quiet cafe to examine its contents. The documents were a treasure trove of information, yellowed newspaper clippings, court transcripts, and a grainy photograph of Madame Beraldy, her face strikingly similar to that of Madame d'Aubrel. Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, gasped, "It's her, Poirot! The same eyes, the same jawline. There's no doubt about it." Poirot held up a hand. "Appearances can deceive, mon ami. But I agree, the resemblance is striking. And here," he tapped a page in the transcript. "It says that Madame Beraldy and Georges Queneau fled France after the trial, their whereabouts unknown. Yet now we find Madame d'Aubrel, with her mysterious wealth and her daughter, Marthe, who is engaged to Jack Renaud. A curious coincidence. None?" Hastings shook his head, struggling to keep up. "But why would Madame d'Aubrel Beraldy? I mean kill Renaud? And what about the tramp? Was he part of the plot?" Poirot closed the file, his expression grave. "The tramp, I believe, was an unfortunate pawn, caught in a web not of his making. His death by seizure, followed by the stabbing, suggests someone wished to confuse the timeline of the crime. As for Renaud's murder, I suspect it was not Madame d'Aubrel herself who wielded the knife, but someone close to her, someone with a motive tied to the inheritance, perhaps." "Marthe," Hastings ventured, his voice hushed. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "It is possible. Marthe d'Aubrel stands to gain much from Jack Renaud's inheritance, should he remain in his father's will. But we must proceed with care. To accuse without proof is to invite disaster. Over the next few days, Poirot threw himself into the investigation with renewed vigor. He interviewed the female servants at the Villa Genevieve, confirming that Renaud had indeed sent his son and a chauffeur away on the night of the murder, leaving the house curiously vulnerable. He visited the bank, where he learned that Madame d'Aubrel's deposit had come from an anonymous source in South America, a detail that raised his eyebrows but did not surprise him. He also tracked down a witness, an elderly groundskeeper at the golf course, Who recalled seeing a young woman in a dark cloak near the crime scene on the night of the murder? She was in a hurry, the groundskeeper said, his voice trembling with age. Carried something in her hand, like a stick or a pipe. Didn't think much of it till now. Lead piping, perhaps, Poirot murmured to Hastings as they left the groundskeeper's cottage. The same piping found near Renaud's body. The plot thickens, mon ami. As the investigation progressed, Poirot's suspicions grew sharper. He began to piece together a theory. Paul Renaud, aware of his past connection to Georges Queneau and Madame Beraldy, had grown wary of Madame d'Aubreuil's presence in Merlinville. The letter signed Georges may have been a warning, or perhaps a threat. Renaud, fearing for his life, had written to Poirot for help, but his precautions sending Jack and the chauffeur away had left him exposed to a killer. Who knew his habits and his secrets? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the golf course, Poirot and Hastings stood at the edge of the shallow grave where Renaud's body had been found. The air was cool, carrying the scent of salt from the nearby sea. Poirot's gaze was fixed on the ground, as if he could see the events of that fateful night unfolding before him. Hastings, he said at last, consider the sequence of events. Renaud digs a grave, perhaps for the tramp whose body he intends to use as a decoy. But someone who knows his plan follows him here, under cover of darkness. They strike, using the dagger that killed both Renaud and the tramp. The overcoat, the love letter, these are distractions meant to mislead us. But the lead piping, that is the key. It was not used as a weapon, but as a tool. Perhaps to dig the grave or to stage the scene. Hastings shivered, the weight of Poirot's words settling over him. So you think Madame d'Aubreuil followed him here and killed him? But why? Motive, Hastings, Poirot said, turning to face him. Always it comes back to motive. Marthe is engaged to Jack. If Renaud disinherits his son, as Giraud believes, Marthe's future is uncertain. But if Renaud dies before, the will is changed, Jack inherits everything, and Marthe, as his fiancée, stands to gain a fortune. It is a powerful incentive, is it not? Hastings nodded slowly, his mind grappling with the implications. And Madame d'Aubreuil Beraldy, she must have known. Perhaps she even encouraged it. Perhaps, Poirot agreed. But we lack the final piece of evidence. We must draw the killer out, force their hand. And for that, I have a plan. The next day, Poirot arranged a meeting at the Villa Genevieve, inviting Madame Renaud, Jack, who had been released on bail, thanks to Poirot's intervention, Madame d'Aubreuil and Marthe. Giraud, though visibly irritated by Poirot's interference, attended as well, his notebook at the ready. The atmosphere in the parlour was tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his presence commanding. Despite his small stature, Mesdames et Messieurs, he began, his voice clear and steady. We are gathered here to unravel the truth behind Paul Renaud's death. I have learned much in these past days, and I believe I am close to identifying the killer. But first, let us revisit the night of the murder. He turned to Eloise. Madame Renaud, you spoke of masked intruders who tied you up and took your husband. Yet the evidence suggests otherwise. The knots on your bindings were loose easily, undone, and the servants, they heard no disturbance. Is it not possible that your story was meant to protect someone? Eloise's face paled, but she held her ground. I told you what happened, Monsieur Poirot. I have nothing more to say. Poirot nodded undeterred. Very well. Let us turn to Madame d'Aubreuil. He faced the elegant woman whose composure seemed to falter under his scrutiny. Madame, your resemblance to a certain Madame Beraldy is remarkable. 22 years ago, she and her lover, Georges Queneau, killed her husband in a plot eerily similar to this one. Tell me, have you ever known a man named Queneau? Madame d'Aubreuil's eyes flashed with anger. How dare you, Monsieur Poirot? I am not this Beraldy woman. I have lived in Merlinville for years, a respectable neighbour to the Renauds, and yet, Poirot continued, a large sum of money appeared in your account shortly before Renaud's death. Money from South America, where Georges Queneau was last known to reside. A curious coincidence. Marthe, who had been silent until now, stood abruptly, her face flushed. "This is outrageous. My mother is innocent, and so am I." "You have no proof, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "Mademoiselle Marthe, your devotion to your mother is admirable. But I wonder, did you know of your mother's past? Did you know that Paul Renaud had begun to suspect her true identity? That he planned to confront her, perhaps even expose her?" Marthe's hands clenched into fists, her breath coming in short gasps. "You're wrong. My mother had nothing to do with it, and neither did I." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Then tell me, mademoiselle, where were you on the night of the murder?" The groundskeeper saw a young woman near the golf course, carrying what may have been a piece of lead piping. "Was that you?" The room fell silent, all eyes on Marthe. Her face drained of colour, and for a moment it seemed she might collapse. Then, with a cry, she turned and fled the room. The door slamming behind her, Hastings started to follow, but Poirot held him back. "Let her go, mon ami. The trap is set. Now, we wait." That night, under Poirot's instructions, Hastings kept watch near the Villa Genevieve, hidden in the shadows of the garden. As the moon rose, he saw a figure slip out of the house, a young woman, her face obscured by a cloak. She moved swiftly toward the golf course, a glinting object in her hand. Hastings' heart raced as he followed, keeping his distance. At the edge of the course, the figure stopped, bending over the shallow grave. Hastings crept closer, his hand on the revolver Poirot had insisted he carry. Suddenly, the figure turned, and he saw Marthe d'Aubrel's face, pale and determined, a dagger in her hand. "Stop!" Hastings shouted, stepping into the moonlight. Marthe froze, her eyes wide with panic. "Captain Hastings, I wasn't going to do anything. I swear." Before Hastings could respond, Poirot emerged from the shadows, his expression calm but resolute. "Mademoiselle Marthe, it is over. You followed Paul Renaud to this very spot on the night of his death. You saw him dig the grave, perhaps for the tramp, and you seized your chance. You stabbed him using the same dagger that killed the tramp, to secure your future with Jack's inheritance." Marthe's shoulders slumped, the dagger falling from her hand. I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "He was going to ruin everything. My mother, she told me about his suspicions, about the letter from George's. I had to protect her, protect us." Poirot nodded, his voice gentle but firm. "And so you killed him, mademoiselle. But the truth, it cannot be buried forever." As Giraud and the police arrived, summoned by Poirot's earlier arrangements, Marthe was taken into custody. Madame d'Aubrel, confronted with the evidence of her past, fled Merlinville that night, her whereabouts unknown. In the days that followed, Poirot explained the full scope of his deductions. To a stunned Hastings, the lead piping, he revealed, had been used by Renaud to dig the grave, but Marthe had picked it up, perhaps intending to use it as a weapon before finding the dagger more suitable. The oversized overcoat and love letter were red herrings, planted to confuse the investigation, and the Beroldy case, with its echoes of deception, had provided the final clue to unraveling Marthe's motive. As Jack Renaud was cleared of all charges, and he and his mother prepared to start anew in South America, Hastings found himself reflecting on the case. "Poirot," he said one evening as they sat in a cafe overlooking the sea, "you saw through it all, the lies, the connections, the motives. How do you do it?" Poirot smiled, sipping his tisane. "It is simple, mon ami. The little grey cells, they see what others overlook, and the heart of man, it is always the same, driven by love, greed, or fear. In this case, it was all three, with the mystery solved, and Dulcie Duveen revealed as Bella's twin, and the mysterious Cinderella at his side. Hastings felt a new chapter beginning, but for Poirot, there would always be another puzzle, another truth to uncover, in the endless dance of human nature. Chapter 9. Jack's arrest. The morning sun cast a pale glow over Merlinville-sur-Mer, its rays filtering through the lace curtains of the Villa Genevieve, where Hercule Poirot sat at a small mahogany table, his hands folded neatly before him. The room was quiet, save for the faint ticking of a mantel clock and the occasional rustle of papers as Captain Hastings flipped through a local newspaper, his brow furrowed in concentration. The air was thick with the weight of the investigation, and the events of the past days hung over them. Like a storm cloud refusing to break, Poirot's moustache twitched slightly as he sipped his tisane, his eyes fixed on a point beyond the window, where the golf course stretched out in a deceptively serene expanse of green. The murder of Paul Renaud, found stabbed in a shallow grave on that very course, had unravelled into a tapestry of deception, and now a new thread had been pulled tight, the arrest of Jack Renaud, the victim's son, by Monsieur Giraud of the Street. Hastings lowered the newspaper, his face a mixture of indignation and disbelief. "I say, Poirot, this is preposterous. Giraud arresting Jack like that on what grounds? The boy's no murderer. He's barely out of his school years, and to think he'd kill his own father for money. It's absurd." Poirot's eyes flicked to Hastings, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Absurd? Mon ami, perhaps, but Monsieur Giraud is not a man swayed by sentiment. He follows the evidence, or rather, what he believes to be the evidence. Let us consider the facts, shall we?" He leaned forward, his voice precise and measured. "Jack Renaud, the heir to his father's fortune, has been disinherited in a recent change to Paul Renaud's will. A quarrel between father and son was overheard by the servants, and now Giraud claims to have found a piece of damning evidence, a letter, perhaps, or a witness who places Jack near the scene of the crime. What do you make of this?" Hastings shook his head, his jaw set. "It's circumstantial at best. Giraud's got it in for Jack because he's desperate to outdo you. He's not looking at the bigger picture, the masked intruders, the mysterious Madame d'Aubrac, that strange girl Hastings met, calling herself Cinderella. There's more to this than a family squabble." Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. "You are correct, Hastings, that there is more to this case than meets the eye. But let us not dismiss Giraud's actions so quickly. He is, after all, a detective of some reputation, even if his methods lack the finesse of Hercule Poirot." He paused, his green eyes glinting with amusement. "We must visit young Jack and hear his side of the story. Only then can we begin to untangle this." Not. The local police station was a squat, grey building on the edge of Merlinville, its stone walls weathered by the salty sea air. Inside, the atmosphere was one of bureaucratic efficiency, with officers bustling about and the clatter of typewriters filling the air. Poirot and Hastings were led to a small, dimly lit room where Jack Renaud sat, his hands clasped tightly on the table before him. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but there was a defiant set to his jaw that suggested he had not yet given up hope. "Monsieur Poirot," Jack exclaimed as they entered, rising to his feet. "Thank God you're here. This is madness. Giraud thinks I killed my father. I'd never do such a thing. I swear it." Poirot raised a hand, gesturing for Jack to sit. "Calm yourself, Monsieur Renaud. I am here to listen, not to judge. Tell me everything, every detail of your movements, your conversations with your father, and anything that might explain why Monsieur Giraud believes you to be guilty." Jack sank back into his chair, running a hand through his dishevelled hair. "It's true that father and I argued a few weeks ago. He was furious about my engagement to Madame d'Aubrac. He said she was after his money, that her mother, Madame d'Aubrac, was a schemer. He threatened to cut me out of his will if I didn't break it off. But I loved Marthe, I still do. I told him I wouldn't give her up, no matter what he did." Poirot's eyes narrowed, and this argument, it was heated, perhaps loud enough for others to overhear. Jack nodded reluctantly. The servants must have heard. It was in the drawing-room, and I wasn't exactly quiet. But that doesn't mean I killed him. The night he died, I was in Cherbourg, miles away. I'd gone to meet a friend, and I have proof train tickets, a receipt from a cafe. I showed them to Giraud, but he waved them off, said they could be forged. Hastings leaned forward, his voice earnest. "And what about this evidence? Giraud claims to have Did he mention anything specific? Jack's face darkened. He says they found a letter in my room written to me by Marthe, begging me to convince father to approve our marriage. Giraud thinks it's proof I had a motive to get rid of father before he could change the will. But that's ridiculous. Marthe would never ask me to do something like that. Poirot's finger steepled beneath his chin, his expression unreadable. This letter, Monsieur Jack. Do you still have it? May I see it? Jack shook his head. Giraud took it. He said it's evidence, but I swear, it's just a love letter. Marthe was worried about father's disapproval. That's all. Poirot sat back, his gaze drifting to the small window high on the wall, where a sliver of sunlight pierced the gloom. And tell me, monsieur, where were you when you learned of your father's death? I was still in Cherbourg, Jack said. I got a telegram from mother the next morning, telling me to come home at once. I took the first train back, but by then, Giraud was already poking around, asking questions. He didn't even give me a chance to grieve before he started accusing me. Poirot nodded slowly, his mind clearly working through the details. And your mother, Madame Eloise, she supports your story, yes? Jack said firmly. She knows I'd never hurt father. She told Giraud about the masked men who broke into the villa that night. But he's obsessed with pinning this on me. Hastings glanced at Poirot, his expression troubled. Those masked men, Eloise's story about the intruders. Do you think there's anything to it, Poirot? Or is it just a distraction? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. A distraction, Hastings. Perhaps, or perhaps it is the key to the entire puzzle. But for now, let us focus on young Jack. Monsieur, is there anything else you can tell me? Anything, no matter how small, that might shed light on this matter? Jack hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. There is one thing, he said slowly. The day before father died, I overheard him talking to someone in his study. I couldn't see who it was, but father sounded agitated, almost afraid. He kept saying something about the past coming back and needing to make things right. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, I don't know. It's been bothering me. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. The past. Coming back, he murmured. Most intriguing. Thank you, Monsieur Jack. You have been most helpful. Rest assured, Hercule Poirot will not rest until the truth is uncovered. As they left the police station, Hastings could barely contain his frustration. Poirot, this is a travesty. Giraud's got the wrong man, and he's wasting time while the real killer is out there. What are we going to do? Poirot adjusted his hat, his expression calm but determined. We should do what we always do. Mon ami, we shall use the little grey cells. Giraud may have his methods, but they are crude, like a hammer striking blindly. We must be precise, like a scalpel. This letter from Marthe d'Aubrel, for instance, it is a clue, but not in the way Giraud thinks. And this mention of the past, it connects to something deeper, something from long ago. We must dig, Hastings, and we must dig carefully. The streets of Merlinville were bustling as they made their way back to the villa, the salty breeze carrying the distant cries of gulls. Poirot's mind was a whirl of possibilities, each clue a piece of a larger puzzle. The oversized overcoat found on Renaud's body, the cryptic love letter in his pocket, the piece of lead piping at the crime scene, and now Jack's mention of his father's fear of the past. All of these were threads, and Poirot was determined to weave them together. Back at the Villa Genevieve, they were greeted by an unexpected visitor, Bella Duveen, a young woman with striking features and a nervous demeanor. Her dark eyes were red-rimmed as if she had been crying, and her hands twisted anxiously in her lap as she sat in the drawing-room. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice trembling, I heard about Jack's arrest. It's all my fault. I killed Monsieur Renaud. Hastings gasped, but Poirot remained impassive, his eyes studying Bella with an intensity that made her shrink back slightly. Mademoiselle Duveen, he said softly, that is a very serious claim. Tell me, why do you say this? Bella's words tumbled out in a rush. I was angry with Monsieur Renaud. He wouldn't let Jack marry me. He said I wasn't good enough, that I was just a chorus girl with no prospects. That night, I went to the villa to confront him. I saw him leave the house and head toward the golf course. I followed him and we argued. I don't know what came over me. I picked up something, a knife, I think, and I stabbed him. I didn't mean to, but I did it. You have to believe me. I didn't want Jack to take the blame. Poirot's expression did not change, but his eyes were sharp, taking in every detail of Bella's story. And this knife, mademoiselle, where is it now? Bella faltered, her hands trembling. I don't know. I must have dropped it. I was so scared. I just ran. Hastings leaned toward Poirot, whispering, "She's lying, isn't she? She's trying to protect Jack." Poirot gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible. "Mademoiselle," he said, addressing Bella again, "your devotion to Monsieur Jack is admirable, but your story does not hold. The weapon that killed Monsieur Renaud was a dagger, not a knife. You picked up, and the circumstances of the crime suggest a plan, not a moment of passion. Tell me, why do you feel the need to confess to a crime you did not commit?" Bella's eyes widened, and she burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. "I just want Jack to be free," she sobbed. "I love him, and I can't bear to see him suffer like this." Poirot's voice softened, but his gaze remained piercing. "Mademoiselle, the truth is the only path to freedom. If you know anything at all, you must tell me now." Bella shook her head, her sobs subsiding into quiet sniffles. "I don't know anything else. I just wanted to help Jack." Poirot rose, adjusting his cuffs with a precise flick of his wrists. "Very well, mademoiselle. But know this, Hercule Poirot does not believe in false confessions. You may go, but we shall speak again." As Bella left the room, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice low. "She's covering for someone, isn't she? But who? Marthe d'Aubrac? Or maybe this Cinderella girl?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Patience, Hastings. The truth is like a fine wine, it must be allowed to breathe. For now, let us consider the connections. Bella Duveen, Marthe d'Aubrac, and the mysterious Cinderella. And then there is Madame d'Aubrac, who seems to cast a long shadow over this affair. We must learn more about her past and about this Beraldi case that seems to echo in the present." The rest of the day was spent in quiet investigation. Poirot sent telegrams to contacts in Paris, requesting information about Madame d'Aubrac and any connection to a case from 22 years ago, involving a woman named Madame Beraldi. He also interviewed the villa's servants, who confirmed that Paul Renaud had sent Jack and a chauffeur away on the day of his death, leaving only the female staff in the house. This detail intrigued Poirot, as it suggested Renaud had anticipated danger or perhaps planned something himself. As evening fell, Poirot and Hastings sat in the villa's garden, the scent of roses mingling with the cool night air. Poirot had left for Paris to pursue a lead, leaving Poirot with a rare moment of quiet to reflect. He lit a cigarette, a habit he indulged in only when deep in thought, and exhaled a thin stream of smoke. "Hastings," he said at last, "this case is like a golf course full of hazards and hidden traps. But I begin to see the shape of it. The oversized overcoat, the lead piping, the second corpse. And now Jack's arrest, they are all pieces of a puzzle that points to a single truth. We must find the connection between Madame d'Aubrac and the past, for therein lies the key." Hastings frowned, his mind racing to keep up. "You think Madame d'Aubrac is involved? But how? And what about Bella's confession?" "Bella's confession," Poirot said, "is a gesture of love, but it is not the truth. As for Madame d'Aubrac, I suspect she is more than she seems. Her sudden wealth, her daughter's engagement to Jack, and this mention of the past coming back, they are not coincidences. We must tread carefully, Hastings, for we are dealing with a mind as cunning as it is ruthless." The night deepened, and the stars above Merlinville glittered like the clues Poirot sought to unravel. Jack Renaud remained in custody, his fate hanging in the balance, while the shadow of the golf course loomed large, its secrets buried in the earth alongside Paul Renaud's body. For Poirot, the game was far from over. Each clue was a stroke, each revelation a step closer to the green, and he would not rest until the final putt revealed the killer. The following morning, Poirot received a response to one of his telegrams, a thin envelope delivered by a breathless courier. He opened it with meticulous care, his eyes scanning the contents with growing intensity. "Mon ami," he said to Hastings, his voice tinged with excitement, "we have a lead. The Berraldy case 22 years ago. A woman named Madame Berraldy and her lover, Georges Queneau, were implicated in the murder of her husband. The method, a staged burglary, a knife and a shallow grave. Does this sound familiar?" Hastings' eyes widened. "You think Madame d'Aubreuil is Madame Berraldy?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "I think, Hastings, that we are on the verge of a breakthrough, but we must proceed with caution. The past is a dangerous thing, and those who carry its secrets will not surrender them easily." The investigation continued, with Poirot piecing together the fragments of the case like a master craftsman assembling a mosaic. He interviewed neighbors, reviewed police reports, and even revisited the golf course, where the shallow grave still bore the marks of the crime. Each step brought him closer to the truth, but the shadow of Gyro's wager loomed large, a challenge to his pride as much as his intellect. As the days passed, the tension in Merlinville grew palpable. The townsfolk whispered about the murder, casting suspicious glances at the Villa Genevieve and its inhabitants. Jack's arrest had sent shockwaves through the community, and Bella's confession only added to the speculation. Yet Poirot remained, undeterred, his mind a steel trap, capturing every detail and holding it fast. One afternoon, as he and Hastings walked along the cliffs overlooking the sea, Poirot paused, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Hastings," he said, "do you know what makes a great detective? It is not the eyes that see, nor the ears that hear, but the mind that understands. We are close, mon ami, very close. The truth is there, waiting for us to claim it." And so, with Jack Renaud languishing in a cell, Bella Duveen's confession hanging in the air, and the spectre of Madame d'Aubreuil's past looming ever larger, Poirot pressed on, determined to unravel the lethal links that bound this case together. The golf course, with its manicured greens and hidden graves, held the answers, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until they were his.